starting off with 7 husbands to serve me. Fang Xiaoxiao traveled to the ancient times where the ratio of men to women was seriously unbalanced. Not only did they practice polyandry, but unmarried men under the age of 18 were forced to marry, otherwise they would have to pay the bachelor tax and be subject to hard labor. So, Fang Xiaoxiao, who was in high spirits, waved her hand and said, "I'll take all the remaining 7. For a while, the news that Fang Xiaoxiao had chosen 7 men in one day spread throughout the government office. Some people who had chosen their husbands and did not leave also came to join in the fun. Seeing that Fang Xiaoxiao had chosen 7 handsome men, many people laughed out loud. "Your brain is broken. You actually chose 7 men who can't carry or lift anything. These useless sickly men can only be worshipped when you marry them." Fang Xiaoxiao turned her head to see that the husbands chosen by those women were all ugly, but strong. She sneered, "You are blind. They are so ugly, I'm afraid you will have nightmares if you take them back." From then on, Fang Xiaoxiao and the 7 handsome men began a shameless life. I thought they were all ordinary handsome men, but I didn't expect that they all had extraordinary identities. Chapter 1: A woman marries 7 husbands. On her first day of transmigration, the court sent her husbands. Not just 1, but 7. If she didn't accept them, she would end up in prison. Fang Xiaoxiao had just crossed over and, upon opening her eyes, was immediately blocked by the Yarman officers and taken to the town to choose her husbands. The head of the town had already gathered all unmarried men over the age of 18 at the Yarman, ready for the women to make their selections. Fang Xiaoxiao was somewhat dazed. She had just crossed over from the 21st century, inhabiting the body of a spendthrift woman. The original body had squandered her inheritance left by her father, who was a wealthy official, and spent her days drinking to the point of drunken stupor. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't wake up until the afternoon, when the Yarman officers came knocking. She had nearly missed the deadline. Though in the 21st century, she had many identities and hidden talents, she was completely inexperienced when it came to romance. On her first day in this new world, to her disbelief, the court was assigning her husbands. Fang Xiaoxiao pinched herself, and only when the pain registered did she finally believe this was not a dream. The Great Yu dynasty had a severe gender imbalance, and this year the ratio had reached 30-1. The surplus of single men had caused social unrest, so the Great Yu dynasty had enacted a system of polyandry. Furthermore, unmarried men over the age of 18 were forced into marriage, or else they would be subject to a bachelor tax or forced labor. Fang Xiaoxiao arrived last, and by the time she showed up, other women had already chosen their husbands. She thought she would be left with the most undesirable men. But to her surprise, the 7 men left standing in the Yarman were all handsome, star-like beauties, each with refined features and fair hands. The Yarman officer, standing at the door, knocked on a drum and announced, "This year, the gender imbalance is the most severe in history, so the court has decreed that every woman must choose at least 2 husbands." Fang Xiaoxiao looked around at the 7 handsome men and felt extremely fortunate. This one is the puppy-like younger brother, he'll be in charge of pampering me. This one has a scholarly air, he can tell me stories. This one looks a little frail, he can argue with me to pass the time. The other 4 can earn money to support us, it's so perfect. Excited, Fang Xiaoxiao waved her hand grandly. "I'll take all 7. Immediately, the news of Fang Xiaoxiao selecting 7 husbands spread throughout the Yarman. Some women who had already chosen their husbands stayed to watch the spectacle. Upon seeing Fang Xiaoxiao select 7 handsome men, many of them laughed. "You've lost your mind. You chose 7 men who can't even lift a hand or carry a burden. These weaklings can only be kept as pets." Fang Xiaoxiao turned to look at their husbands chosen by the other women. Each one was ugly and disfigured. She scoffed, "Your eyes are the ones that are blind. If you bring these back, they'll probably give you nightmares. What does appearance matter? Strength is what matters most." Fang Xiaoxiao froze, realizing that the other women had chosen their husbands based solely on their physical strength, not looks. She had only noticed their faces and hadn't paid attention to their bodies. These men were all tall and strong, unlike the ones she had selected, who, despite their handsome faces, had slim bodies, pale complexions, and looked frail and sickly. So, this dynasty only cared about muscle, not looks. No wonder these 7 had been left behind. But that wasn't the worst of it. Someone recognized her and kindly reminded her, "Fang Xiaoxiao, can you afford the dowry of 5 taels of silver and the head tax of 500 wen per person?" Fang Xiaoxiao was stunned. She had known that selecting husbands came with such a hefty price tag and taxes. You can't back out now. If you change your mind, you'll end up in prison. The Yarman officer threatened when he saw her hesitate. Fang Xiaoxiao frowned. They were the ones left behind, can't the price be cheaper? The officer's face darkened. Dare to haggle in the Yarman? Fang Xiaoxiao sighed. She had only enough money for one husband. Choose me. Little sister, I'm well read, I can tell you stories. Big sister. Choose me. I only love you. I can cook and do housework, take me with you, little sister. Seeing the situation go downhill, the 7 men all started to pitch themselves to her. Finally, Fang Xiaoxiao set her sights on the one who promised to do housework. I'll take him. The officer counted the silver Fang Xiaoxiao handed over and said, fine. But you must bring the remaining 6 husbands home within 3 months, or you'll still end up in prison. A woman who had always been at odds with Fang Xiaoxiao sneered, Fang Xiaoxiao, you've squandered your family's wealth and now you're selecting 7 husbands. Wait for the prison sentence in 3 months. Fang Xiaoxiao gave her a glare. 30 taels of silver was nothing to her, a transmigrator from the 21st century with many hidden identities. She could definitely earn enough within 3 months. Returning home, Fang Xiaoxiao couldn't help but sigh when she saw her empty house. For the next 3 months, she would need to work hard to make money. At least she had chosen a husband who could do housework. She turned her attention to He Jinyan, the first husband she had brought home. He Jinyan, confused, watched as Fang Xiaoxiao sweetly linked her arm with his and said, Husband, you chop firewood while I go up the mountain to collect herbs and sell them in the town tomorrow to make money. I'll go with you, wife. He Jinyan awkwardly smiled. He was the heir of the prestigious Jing'an Marquis' residence and wouldn't normally do housework. He had escaped an arranged marriage by pretending to be a merchant's son, only to end up in a forced marriage due to his bachelor status. But Fang Xiaoxiao insisted, the mountain path is difficult. Husband, stay home and chop firewood. If you find it tiring, you can start by washing the dishes. He Jinyan pulled at his lips, then wife, hurry back. The back mountain was full of lush greenery, with deep roots and thick leaves. The dense forest shaded the area, so few people came here. Because of this, many precious herbs had remained undiscovered for a long time. Fang Xiaoxiao walked deeper into the woods, scanning the ground. Ganoderma lucidum, Gastrodia alater, Osmundus, Dendrobium. We're going to be rich. After only a short while, Fang Xiaoxiao had collected a full basket of herbs. Excited, she returned home only to find that He Jinyan had chopped just a few pieces of firewood, and the ground was stained with blood. Her heart sank as she walked to the kitchen, only to find the dishes had been shattered. He Jinyan. Fang Xiaoxiao rushed out, fearing that He Jinyan had been kidnapped. Wife. He Jinyan walked out of the room, his hand wrapped in bandages, and said with a pitiful look, It's my fault, I hurt my hand chopping firewood. I wanted to wash the dishes, but ended up breaking several bowls due to the injury. Sigh, just what this poor family needed, more trouble. Fang Xiaoxiao sighed. What did you say, wife? He Jinyan grimaced. Nothing, I collected herbs, let me rebandage your wound. No, it's fine. He Jinyan hastily refused. The blood on the floor was just his way of pretending to be injured because he didn't want Fang Xiaoxiao to discover the truth. If she realized, she might return him to the Yarman and select another husband. Seeing his refusal, Fang Xiaoxiao gave up. She didn't dare let him do anything else, afraid he might break more things, so she ended up doing the chores herself. After dinner, as she washed the dishes in the kitchen, she heard a dog barking outside. Stepping out, she saw a pale and frail man standing in her yard. Wasn't he this one of her remaining 6 husbands, Pei Yang? Pei Yang? Pei Yang scanned the surroundings and, seeing Fang Xiaoxiao walking out of the kitchen, smiled faintly. Dragging his sword and injured body, he slowly walked toward her. Wife, life at the Yarman was too miserable, I came to seek refuge with you. Chapter 2, Their husband comes knocking. Their whole point of choosing a husband was to cover up his identity, but after selecting a husband, Fang Xiaoxiao left him at the county office. Reluctantly, he had to pay the 5 taels of silver for her dowry and head tax, and used the address provided by the authorities to find her and seek refuge. Fang Xiaoxiao looked at him with suspicion. One man who had injured his hand chopping firewood and another who broke dishes while washing them. Pei Yang was already hard to take care of. And now, another Pei Yang, who looked even weaker, unable to carry anything or even lift a finger. Surely couldn't he be supported? Fang Xiaoxiao rejected him outright. The county office is, after all, a government institution. It can shelter you from the wind and rain, and it even provides meals. But staying with me will leave you hungry and cold. You should stay in the office for now, and after 3 months, I'll come to take you all. Pei Yang, as if anticipating her refusal, pulled out a document from his sleeve and unfolded it. Isn't this the marriage certificate you signed at the county office? He smiled smugly as he looked at Fang Xiaoxiao. Fang Xiaoxiao was taken aback. The marriage certificate she had signed, which seemed like a formality, had now become a tool of coercion. Pei Yang, still smiling, narrowed his eyes and threatened, "Madam, this is the marriage contract you signed. If you don't take care of me now, the government will punish you." Fang Xiaoxiao sighed inwardly. Now that the marriage certificate had been produced, she couldn't just ignore him. But keeping him was still impossible. Her gaze shifted to He Jinyan, silently pleading for help. He Jinyan blinked innocently, his eyes full of sincerity as he tried to confirm her intentions. "Huh? Now that Pei Yang is here, do you think you can't support 2 of us? Seeing that I'm not good with housework, you want to send me back, don't you?" In his heart, He Jinyan was secretly thinking to himself. The more he thought, the more he felt like he was right. His heart raced, and he quickly began to act pitifully. "Madam, I hurt my hand today while working. I even plan to get up early tomorrow to cook you breakfast as a surprise. Please don't send me away." He then turned his gaze toward Pei Yang. Pei Yang looks weak, but who knows if he is pretending. He might just be trying to gain your sympathy. Fang Xiaoxiao thought He Jinyan had a point and turned to look at Pei Yang. Just as she was about to speak, Pei Yang suddenly spat blood and fainted, collapsing onto the courtyard ground. "Pei Yang? Pei Yang?" Fang Xiaoxiao rushed forward to shake him awake. His body was burning, but his limbs were icy cold, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. This didn't look like an act. If she really kicked him out now and the villagers reported it to the town authorities, she wouldn't have to wait 3 months, she'd be in jail by tomorrow. Left with no choice, Fang Xiaoxiao reluctantly decided to keep him. "Drag him back to the room," she sighed, signaling He Jinyan to move Pei Yang inside. After removing Pei Yang's clothes, Fang Xiaoxiao was stunned. His body was exceptionally well built, broad shoulders, a narrow waist, 8-pack abs, and long, straight legs. He was obviously someone skilled in martial arts. The injuries on his body weren't life-threatening, but the weapon that had hurt him was poisoned, which made him so weak. Unfortunately, the antidote for this poison was hard to make, and Fang Xiaoxiao didn't have the necessary herbs. The town was far away, and by the time she went and returned, Pei Yang might already be dead. She had no choice but to use acupuncture to suppress the poison in his system. One needle after another, Fang Xiaoxiao felt the poison inside Pei Yang being pushed and suppressed into one place. As she removed the last needle, her face softened, and she smiled. The poison is finally under control. As she looked closely, she couldn't help but notice how handsome Pei Yang was. His features were cold and aloof, but his appearance was flawless. Just as Fang Xiaoxiao leaned in closer, Pei Yang suddenly opened his eyes. A daughter of a country squire, infamous for being a spendthrift, how could she possibly know medicine? And yet, her medical skills were so impressive, rivaling even the imperial physicians in the palace. How could someone like her, with such talent, have ruined her family fortune? Startled, Fang Xiaoxiao jumped back as Pei Yang sat up and smiled. "Madam, we are already married. Why are you acting so shy?" Her face flushed, and she quickly turned away. "Although the marriage certificate has been signed, we haven't had a proper wedding, so don't think you can take advantage of me." Pei Yang smirked. "Oh? So, you and He Jinyan are completely innocent, right?" Fang Xiaoxiao glanced at him, her expression calm. Of course. She was a proper lady, and since they hadn't had the wedding ceremony, nothing had happened. For some reason, Pei Yang felt a strange sense of joy. But he quickly resumed his teasing. "Before I came here, I heard you were a good-for-nothing who squandered your family's wealth. How is it that you suddenly know medicine?" That's because after losing my fortune and falling ill without money for treatment, I taught myself a little bit." Fang Xiaoxiao quickly came up with a convenient excuse to divert the conversation. Pei Yang wasn't convinced. A sick person couldn't just learn medicine and be as good as the palace's royal physicians. Fang Xiaoxiao must have been a genius, and such a genius wouldn't he squander her family's fortune. However, at the moment, he also needed a place to hide and recover from his injuries. I see. Madam, you are truly clever. Pei Yang smiled, temporarily dropping the subject. She's easy to fool. Fang Xiaoxiao smiled triumphantly, grinding herbs to apply to Pei Yang's wounds. Her cool fingertips brushed against his warm skin, and she was surprised to find that he, even injured, felt warmer than her. Why are your hands so cold, madam? Pei Yang's voice came from above her. Fang Xiaoxiao looked up to find his handsome face just inches from hers. She could feel his breath against her skin, and in his dark eyes, she could see her own reflection, as well as an unspoken tenderness neither of them had noticed before. Pei Yang's hand instinctively reached out and gently held her hand, the one applying medicine to his chest. Fang Xiaoxiao immediately pulled her hand back. What are you doing? She could still feel his warmth lingering on her fingers. If you keep doing this, you can apply your own medicine. She threw the crushed herbs onto the table and pretended to leave. Pei Yang quickly tried to get out of bed, his voice full of desperation. Madam, I was wrong. I was wrong, come back. He leaned back on the bed, propping himself up and pleading, I can't live without you. The last part made Fang Xiaoxiao's heart skip a beat. You're a smooth talker. She turned back, her face calm again, and applied the medicine to Pei Yang's wounds more forcefully. Pei Yang winced in pain, gritting his teeth. It hurts, be gentler. Outside, He Jin Yan sat idly, counting the sparrows. Those two have been inside for so long. Isn't he the medicine changed yet? Chapter 3, Discovering a Business Opportunity. After applying the medicine to Pei Yang, it was already dark. Fang Xiaoxiao woke up early the next morning. She packed the herbs she had collected yesterday and, with the rising sun, set off toward the town. Pei Yang and He Jin Yan insisted on coming along. Unable to do housework, He Jin Yan took the initiative to carry Fang Xiaoxiao's herb basket. As he did so, he provocatively glanced at Pei Yang. I can carry the herbs to relieve my wife's fatigue. What can you do? Pei Yang ignored him, walking up to take Fang Xiaoxiao's hand. Fang Xiaoxiao enjoyed the little rivalry between the two of them as they made their way to the town, chatting and joking along the way. In just under half an hour, they arrived at the largest pharmacy in town, Yongantang. He Jin Yan set the basket of herbs down on the ground, and Fang Xiaoxiao called out, Shopkeeper, I need to sell these herbs. She had brought high-quality herbs, and with a basket nearly half full, they fetched a good price. Shopkeeper, please prepare 3 days' worth of medicine according to this prescription. After receiving the money, Fang Xiaoxiao handed over the prescription to the shopkeeper. The prescription contained herbs for treating Pei Yang's wounds and detoxifying his body, some of which could not be found on the mountain. There were also a few pills listed, but making them was too troublesome, so she decided to buy them directly at the pharmacy. The young assistant looked at the prescription and hesitated. His brow furrowed as he hesitated to move. Fang Xiaoxiao noticed his hesitation and asked, What's the problem? Are these herbs not available? Yongantang is the largest pharmacy in town. The shopkeeper, hearing the commotion, walked over. What's going on? The young assistant handed the prescription to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper examined the prescription closely, stroking his beard and squinting at the herbs listed. After a moment, he spoke up. Miss, we do have these herbs in stock, but these pills. Well, not only do we not have them in this pharmacy, but none of the pharmacies in town sell them. Fang Xiaoxiao suddenly saw a business opportunity and asked, Is it just these pills that are unavailable, or are the other herbs also out of stock? The shopkeeper paused before replying, None of them are available. Fang Xiaoxiao's face lit up with a smile. In that case, just prepare the herbs for me. When they arrived at the doorstep of their house, Pei Yang noticed that Fang Xiaoxiao had been in a good mood the whole way. Unconsciously, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he asked, What got you so happy? Fang Xiaoxiao. Before she could respond, a shout interrupted them. Turning around, they saw it was Yu Donglei, a woman from the village. Yu Donglei was once the village beauty, and before Fang Xiaoxiao's family lost their wealth and moved here, all the single men in the village from 80-year-olds to 3-year-olds had surrounded her. Since Fang Xiaoxiao moved here, the attention naturally shifted to her, and now Yu Donglei couldn't stand her. Although Fang Xiaoxiao never paid attention to her, Yu Donglei continued to make trouble for her like a persistent fly. The previous owner of the body had never bothered with her, but that didn't mean Fang Xiaoxiao would just let her pick a fight. What's going on? He Jinyan and Pei Yang had already entered the house first, so Yu Donglei only saw Fang Xiaoxiao. Hearing about her choosing 7 suitors in one day yesterday, she had waited outside the house, hoping to see her make a fool of herself. You're already so poor, and yet you pick 7 husbands in one go. You're just putting on a brave face. In the end, you won't end up with any of them. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't respond, just crossed her arms and quietly watched Yu Donglei's performance. The more Yu Donglei saw Fang Xiaoxiao staying silent, the more she became impassioned. I heard you were the last to arrive yesterday and picked up the ones that others had rejected. They must be terrible men. Fang Xiaoxiao let out a derisive laugh, clapping her hands. She then called for Pei Yang and He Jinyan to come out. When He Jinyan stepped out, Yu Donglei was already stunned. But it was only when Pei Yang came out that she was completely shocked. She stared wide-eyed at Pei Yang. How could there be such a handsome man in the world? Fang Xiaoxiao saw Yu Donglei's infatuated gaze and couldn't be bothered to respond to her. Pei Yang had long been used to women looking at him like that, but he found it repulsive, especially since Yu Donglei wasn't even half as graceful as the young ladies in the capital. Yu Donglei kept staring at Pei Yang with a love-struck look in her eyes until Pei Yang entered the house and disappeared into the shadows. Bang! The door slammed shut, and Yu Donglei snapped back to reality. She had unknowingly watched Pei Yang follow Fang Xiaoxiao into her home, only to be locked outside as the door was slammed in her face. Fang Xiaoxiao, you wait for me! Yu Donglei shouted angrily from outside, but soon her voice faded away. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't pay any attention to the so-called village beauty. She had spent the whole day visiting the town's pharmacies, but none of them sold the pills she needed. It just so happened that she knew how to make them. Now, she didn't worry about not making back the 30 taels in 3 months. After treating Pei Yang's wounds, Fang Xiaoxiao set off again with her small basket to collect the herbs needed to make the pills. In just 2 days, Fang Xiaoxiao had secretly named the back mountain as the place where the medicinal herbs were abundant. Today, it took her less time to gather a basket of herbs than it had the day before. Just as she was about to head back home, she turned a corner and found a black-clad man kneeling on the ground. Startled, she quickly ducked into the bushes and saw the person he was meeting. It was none other than her husband from the previous day, Pei Yang. At this moment, Pei Yang seemed completely different from the one she had seen the past 2 days. There was an innate elegance and nobility about him, but his cold, piercing eyes made that elegance almost seem aloof. His cold gaze landed on her. In the next instant, the black-clad man disappeared. Pei Yang walked toward her, his expression stern. What did you see? I didn't see anything. Fang Xiaoxiao quickly retreated, awkwardly smiling. Hubby, I've gathered the herbs, let us go home. The distance between them grew smaller, and Fang Xiaoxiao tried to persuade him, I've always thought your identity isn't simple. I don't want to die here. A delicate little dagger appeared in Pei Yang's slender hand. He was going to kill her. Fang Xiaoxiao raised her hands in a gesture of surrender and took 2 steps back, nervously laughing. Seeing that Pei Yang didn't stop, she made a decisive choice and stood still, closing her eyes. The poison in your body has been fully neutralized. I can make pills to detoxify you. After these words, she stopped hearing Pei Yang's footsteps. When she opened her eyes again, Pei Yang was standing right in front of her. However, the dagger was no longer in his hand, and Fang Xiaoxiao let out a sigh of relief. This town doesn't have any pharmacies selling the pills, but I know how to make detox pills. If you spare my life, I'll make them for you. I guarantee that I won't tell anyone about what happened today. Pei Yang's hand, which had been drawing closer, made the hairs on the back of Fang Xiaoxiao's neck stand up. His slender hand brushed her face, taking the herb basket from her shoulder, and he smiled slightly. Then let us go home, my wife. Pei Yang remembered how He Jinyan had grabbed the herb basket in town that morning, with a provocative look aimed at him. He really wanted to throw him out and let him sleep on the streets. Chapter 4, Uncovering Their Husbands' Secrets. When I returned home with Pei Yang, it was already dark. This time, in order to show off, He Jinyan specially cooked noodles at home and waited for Fang Xiaoxiao to come back for dinner. In the courtyard, He Jinyan still looked up at Pei Yang, his eyes full of boasting. I can help my wife with housework, unlike you who are injured and can't do anything. It wasn't until he saw the pot of noodles that Pei Yang's sense of crisis disappeared, and he even laughed out loud. Is this the noodles you cooked? Have you ever eaten it yourself? The noodles in the pot are about to become a pot of pancakes. Strange. It was fine when it was first made. He Jinyan said in disbelief. Fang Xiaoxiao patted her head and said, forget it. We are poor and we cannot waste food. After dinner, Fang Xiaoxiao rekindled the fire in the stove and started making pills. The kitchen was brightly lit and filled with the aroma of medicine. It was already late at night when they finished. Fang Xiaoxiao yawned and put the pills away. I walked out of the kitchen and was about to go back to their house to sleep, but I saw a man in black kneeling on one knee on the ground at the corner. Scored twice. The only difference is that this time the owner is He Jinyan. He Jinyan took another piece of paper and ordered his subordinates in a deep voice, continue to investigate along the clues. She can't be discovered this time. He Jinyan is not poisoned and she can't save his life. Fang Xiaoxiao wanted to leave as if nothing had happened, but when she turned around, she stepped on the mouse's tail, causing the mouse to squeak. Hissed Tilder, even though I'm not afraid of mice, I was still scared when I stepped on something soft in such a tense atmosphere. In the blink of an eye, the mouse ran into the firewood pile and disappeared. What are you doing here, madam? Before Fang Xiaoxiao turned around, He Jinyan's voice appeared behind her. Fang Xiaoxiao saw that she couldn't hide anymore, so she had to pretend that she had just arrived and said, Har har, I just developed a pill. Why are you here, Jinyan? Are you here to pick me up? He Jinyan narrowed his eyes slightly in the darkness, although Fang Xiaoxiao couldn't see. But one could still hear the danger in his voice. Did you hear anything just now? Fang Xiaoxiao looked at him with her big eyes flashing. What did you hear? I just came out of the kitchen and didn't hear anything. He Jinyan relaxed his tone. Really? I'm here to pick you up. It's getting late, go back and rest early. Phew Tilder, I finally managed to deal with it. How come these two have hidden identities? The next morning, Fang Xiaoxiao quietly went out with the pills. Pei Yang and He Jinyan are simply ancient versions of themselves, wearing multiple vests. Now that I have discovered their identities, I don't know when they will kill me to silence me. It is better to go to the Yarman secretly and send them both back while it is still early. Madam, where are you going so early in the morning? As soon as she walked out of the hospital gate, Pei Yang stood at the door and called her. Fang Xiaoxiao turned around and saw that He Jinyan had followed her out. Helplessly, Fang Xiaoxiao had no choice but to take the two of them with her. I can't go to the Yarman, but fortunately I will continue to take the two of them to Yong'an Hall to sell medicine. Boss, take a look at these pills. I spent 3 hours boiling each one of them. They combine the effects of several medicinal herbs. The effect is immediate after taking one pill, and it's not as bitter as taking medicine. The people here had never seen the pills before, so Fang Xiaoxiao patiently introduced the advantages of the pills to the shopkeeper. The medicinal herbs picked yesterday were limited, but even so. Last night in the kitchen, Fang Xiaoxiao also prepared a whole bottle of pills, because the efficacy is almost the same and the steps are the same. So, one pill represents 3 hours. One bottle also takes 3 hours. To make money, these are not lies. Just as the shopkeeper was stroking his beard and estimating the price, Fang Xiaoxiao heard the familiar voice in the village again. Fang Xiaoxiao. Yu Donglei shouted with her hands in her pockets. Yu Donglei was just about to make fun of Fang Xiaoxiao, but then she saw Pei Ying standing beside her. Her expression immediately changed and she came up to me with a seductive look on her face. Miss, I am already a married man, please respect yourself. When Yu Donglei was still 3 feet away from him, Pei Ying dodged. Yu Donglei missed her target and bumped into the waiter who was serving medicine. Turning around, even He Jinyan who was standing next to her moved closer to Fang Xiaoxiao as if to avoid suspicion. There are so many people in the pharmacy. Pei Yang, He Jinyan, and Fang Xiaoxiao are all very good looking. As early as when she came in, she attracted the attention of most people in Yong'an Hall. Yu Donglei coveted Pei Yang and wanted to pay for him. But Pei Yang dodged it and got himself splashed with the medicine soup. So he took out all his anger on Fang Xiaoxiao. Yu Donglei cleaned the medicine residue off her body and shouted angrily, Fang Xiaoxiao, it's fine that you sold medicinal herbs here yesterday. What weird things are you selling today? Sugar pills. Yu Donglei grabbed one, held it, and turned it around, wanting everyone to laugh at Fang Xiaoxiao. Everyone had never heard of the pills and was confused. Yu Donglei threw the pill directly into the discarded medicine soup that spilled on the ground. This stuff must be mud you rubbed out from somewhere, and you put some medicinal scent on it and wanted to bring it to Young and Hole to cheat people. It's definitely not a good thing, Yu Donglei said, and then she stepped forward and stepped on the pill that it had thrown on the ground. Fang Xiaoxiao folded her hands and sneered, then stood there looking at her quietly. Miss, I checked it out, and the pills are indeed good stuff. The next moment, Yu Donglei was dumbfounded by the shopkeeper's words. The shopkeeper continued, if you only sell to us, Young and Hall, in the future, I will sign a contract with you, and each bottle will cost 10 taels of silver. Yu Donglei didn't expect that Fang Xiaoxiao was selling real pills. Just as she was about to get angry, the shopkeeper waved at her. He summoned a few thugs to hold her down. This Miss Fang has already sold the pills to me, we are just estimating the price. And you? The shopkeeper pointed at Yu Donglei and said, the pill you took away is already our Young and Hole's pill. You maliciously damaged the medicinal materials of our Young and Hole. In addition to the original price, you must also pay 30 cents for labor costs. How could Yu Donglei have imagined that the idiot Fang Xiaoxiao could actually develop such an expensive pill? It's obvious that she was a good-for-nothing spendthrift girl, an illiterate fool. Yes, it must have been developed by her newly chosen husband Pei Yang. Pei Yang is obviously a rich or noble man, so how could he become Fang Xiaoxiao's husband? Yu Donglei was filled with hatred, but unfortunately she had no place to vent it. The medicinal herb she just destroyed cost 700 coins, but how could she afford it? The shopkeeper wanted to bring thugs with her to go home and get it, but he didn't even need thugs, her father would beat her to death. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't know what Yu Donglei was thinking, but she felt very happy to see that Yu Donglei got her comeuppance. Chapter 5 Another Ancestor. After leaving Young and Hall, the two people who were originally inseparable no longer followed Fang Xiaoxiao. They all said that they had something urgent to do and asked Fang Xiaoxiao to go back first. It was just what she wanted, taking advantage of the fact that Pei Yang and He Jinyan were not around. On their way back, Fang Xiaoxiao turned to the county government office and found the chief Yarman runner. Fang Xiaoxiao became famous in the government office because she picked up Chilang in one day. All the bailiffs in the Yarman recognized her. I picked Pei Yang and He Jinyan before. One of them is too thin to have children. The other can't lift anything. If I marry her, she can only watch. I want to cancel the engagement. Fang Xiao said this in a huff. The one who is too weak to give birth naturally refers to Pei Yang. There must always be a proper reason to cancel an engagement. Although there were many bachelors in the Dayu dynasty, having children was the most important thing. She was anxious to dismiss Pei Yang, and giving him a reputation of being infertile would make it easier to dismiss him. Who knew that the leading Yarman runner said? You have already chosen the one that day, and the marriage certificate has been signed. You can't back out. If you insist on withdrawing, you will be charged with abandonment and fined 100 taels. What? I can't return it, but I still have to pay a fine of 100 taels. Seeing Fang Xiaoxiao's dissatisfaction, the leading Yarman runner continued. If you can retire at will after marrying a husband, wouldn't everyone just marry 100 or 80 at a time and then retire slowly? Which family can afford to pay 100 or 80 betrothal gifts at once? Fang Xiao was angry and said, since I can't retreat, I'll just continue to lead the company. This time, she must bring home a gentle, considerate, and housework-capable husband. Yes, 5 taels of silver and 500 literati head tax. Fang Xiaoxiao paid the money and chose one of the remaining 5 husbands who looked gentle and easy to command. Fang Xiaoxiao remembered him. He was the gentleman who said he was well-read and could tell her stories to put her to sleep at night when they first met. Fang Xiaoxiao was very happy as she imagined him telling her stories and coaxing her to sleep at night. Madam, why are you so happy? Even his voice was so gentle, not like those 2 men in vests at all. At this time, Pei Yang and He Jinyan sneezed. Prince, what's wrong? He Jinyan's subordinates asked. He Jinyan shook his head. Nothing. Keep watching and report back anytime. Fang Xiaoxiao cleared her throat and said, I haven't asked you your name yet. My surname is Murong, and my given name is Changqing. You can just call me Changqing. Murong Changqing closed the paper fan, lowered his head and said with a smile. Murong. Fang Xiaoxiao pondered based on the memories in her mind. Murong is a noble family name of my Dayu dynasty, how could she be chosen by me as your husband? Fang Xiaoxiao didn't say anything. Murong Chanqing didn't care and explained with a smile, "To be honest, my family is just a branch of a branch of a branch of a branch of the Murong mansion in the capital. The four side branches are enough to show that by his generation the family had fallen into decline, and only the surname was left. It's the same reason as Fang Xiaoxiao's original self who squandered all the family property. If my parents were still at home, maybe I could go to the capital." Murong Chanqing sighed. Sure enough, it was just as Fang Xiaoxiao expected. Fang Xiaoxiao patted his shoulder and comforted him, "It's okay, I'm the same as you. We can support each other in the future and live a good life. Don't be like your two predecessors who did nothing at home and waited for others to serve them." Murong Chanqing held her hand in return, and they comforted each other. At the same time, Pei Yang and He Jinyan received the news almost at the same time that Fang Xiaoxiao had brought another husband back from the Yarman. Although both of them said goodbye to Fang Xiaoxiao after coming out of Yong'an Hall, they both sent people to follow Fang Xiaoxiao at the same time. But at this moment they learned that Fang Xiaoxiao wanted to send them back while they were away, so she brought a handsome man back from the Yarman. Pei Yang crumpled the letter paper in his hand into a ball, ended his plan ahead of schedule, and went home. He Jinyan also chose to go back at this moment. After returning home, Fang Xiaoxiao just wanted to ask Murong Chanqing to cook, but before she could say anything, she heard Murong Chanqing coughing. A bad premonition surged into Fang Xiaoxiao's heart. Fang Xiaoxiao held Murong Chanqing's hand and felt his pulse. It didn't matter if she didn't feel his pulse. After taking Murong Chanqing's pulse, he found that his health was even worse than Pei Yang's. Not only should you avoid overworking, you should also take good care of yourself, otherwise you may catch a cold or fever. In severe cases, it can cause physical strain, harm your health, and shorten your life. I actually made a mistake again and picked this ancestor back. Fang Xiaoxiao was still struggling on the brink of collapse, while Pei Yang and He Jinyan returned together. Looking at the new person in the room, he was alert in his heart but welcomed him calmly on the surface. "Brother Murong, you are finally here. Brother Pei, Brother He." The three of them had known each other's names when they were in the Yarman, but except Pei Yang, the other two were still unclear about each other's background. In the evening, Yu Donglei came to the door. Fang Xiaoxiao was still surprised that she was not beaten to death by her father, and she returned to the village safely after paying the compensation. Yu Donglei specifically asked to see Pei Yang, and Fang Xiaoxiao was happy to have some free time, so she let Pei Yang meet her to see what tricks she was up to. "Brother Pei, can I call you that?" In the room, Yu Donglei lit the incense and said to Pei Yang. "No." Pei Yang refused coldly. Fang Xiaoxiao, who was secretly hiding outside the house watching the show, smelled the scent of the cassia tree. She wanted to enjoy the show, so she deliberately did not remind Pei Yang. Pei Yang heard the heroine's giggles outside the house and looked at Yu Donglei, who was about to take off her clothes. He dodged and moved behind Yu Donglei, knocking her out with a knife. "Your Highness." The man in black from last time knelt in front of Pei Yang. "Take her away." Pei Yang said. "Yes." After his subordinates left, Pei Yang quickly went out and Fang Xiaoxiao had already returned to their house. If Pei Yang had sex with Yu Donglei tonight, I would catch them in bed tomorrow and send Pei Yang back. Just as she was thinking this, a dark shadow appeared in front of Fang Xiaoxiao's bed. Fang Xiaoxiao was about to scream when the dark shadow pressed down on her and covered her mouth. "Pei Yang? How did he end up here? Shouldn't he be in the room with Yu Donglei now? You clearly know." Pei Yang was just about to question Fang Xiaoxiao when the drug suddenly took effect. Smelling the unique medicinal fragrance on Fang Xiaoxiao's body, looking at the vague, blurry, soft lips in the darkness, Pei Yang couldn't help but kiss her, his big hands caressing Fang Xiao's small and soft waist. "Pei Yang?" This sudden kiss made Fang Xiaoxiao want to scream, but she could only make humming sounds. After much difficulty, he freed his hand from Pei Yang's restraints and pulled out the silver needle. Just as he was about to give him acupuncture to detoxify, He Jinyan's voice came from outside the room. Are you asleep?" Regarding the encounter with her in the yard last night, He Jinyan still didn't believe that she didn't hear anything, so he wanted to knock on the door and go in to test it again. "Don't come in yet." Before she could finish her sentence, Pei Yang's lips touched hers again. Chapter 6 I'll make you look good. Upon seeing this, Fang Xiaoxiao quickly turned her head to the side and used silver needles to seal the opponent's tendons and veins. Pei Yang only felt a dizziness in his head, and soon collapsed on the bed. Huh, I finally got him to calm down. I need to quickly detoxify him. Outside. He Jinian wanted to test Fang Xiaoxiao to see if she knew his identity. He waited anxiously outside for a while, but did not get any response from the other party. This made him very dissatisfied, and he knocked on the door again. Can I come in now? Not yet, just wait outside. Fang Xiaoxiao was standing by the bed in the room, trying to detoxify Pei Yang, when she heard He Jinian's urging voice at the door. She glanced at Pei Yang, whose shirt was open on the bed, revealing his charming muscular body. It's really beautiful, but it's a sickly thing and is of no use at all. It is better to detoxify him as soon as possible. If he dies from the poison and dies here, it will not be good. Just after she had performed the acupuncture, she heard someone knocking on the door again. Have to hurry up. After some operations, Pei Yang finally woke up. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't say anything, but turned around, opened the door, and welcomed He Jinian in. When He Jinian entered the room, he looked around and found Pei Yang was there too. The other person still had that stern face, but there was a hint of redness in his pale complexion. It seems that Fang Xiaoxiao is detoxifying him. What was the lady doing in the room just now? Of course, it's to help Pei Yang detoxify. What else can I do? Fang Xiaoxiao walked to the square wooden table and wanted to pour herself a cup of tea. He Jinian was quick to move and quickly walked to the square table and poured the wine for her. It's really hard for my wife. Look at him, he looks so sick and can't even carry anything. As he spoke, he had already pulled over a bench and sat down. Pei Yang also came over and sat down. The three of them just looked at each other. Fang Xiaoxiao finished her tea and glanced at him with her little mouth. I wonder who is so weak that he can't even chop a few pieces of wood after a long time. He Jinian still wanted to argue, but that was the reality. In order to avoid being discovered, he had to pretend to be weak and frail. Oh, I didn't want to do this, I'm sorry, my lady. Fang Xiaoxiao was stunned for a moment. This guy is really an acting genius and he always shows off his acting skills. At this moment, Yu Donglei, holding her aching neck, came to the room where they were. She clearly remembered that she drugged Pei Yang, but she knew nothing about what happened afterwards. I can't figure it out and I don't want to think about it anymore. As soon as I looked up, I saw three people sitting at the table. Especially the handsome young man Pei Yang, with a fair face, although he looks aloof. But he couldn't resist his liking for it, so after thinking it over he decided to buy it from Fang Xiaoxiao. She walked quickly to Fang Xiaoxiao and pointed at Pei Yang. I bought it, you tell me how much I want to sell it for. When Fang Xiaoxiao heard this, she was very happy. Just buy it. It didn't matter to her anyway. I don't mind. If you want to buy it, just buy it. Oh, I didn't expect you to be so reasonable. Then tell me the number. Yu Donglei thought that she spent 5 taels of silver to buy it, but the person had already used it, so she definitely couldn't buy it again at the original price. At most I can pay about 2 taels, and the bank will have to pay another 500 liters in head tax, which is quite painful just thinking about it. Pei Yang just looked at the two of them coldly as they discussed the sale of his own property. However, he doesn't want to be sold again, now that his identity has been discovered by Fang Xiaoxiao. The original plan was to silence her, but unfortunately she still had some uses. He Jinian came to test Fang Xiaoxiao to see if she had discovered his identity, but he never expected to encounter this incident. His idea was that since he could get Pei Yang away, wouldn't that be better? Now, the fewer people there are around Fang Xiaoxiao, the better, so that her identity will not be easily discovered. For people have for different minds. Yu Donglei stretched out 2 fingers and shook them in front of everyone, looking very proud. Fang Xiaoxiao knew very well that given her stingy personality, she had already guessed how much she would have to pay. But I won't let her succeed. Oh, you want to offer 2 small goldfish for Pei Yang? I didn't expect that our Pei Yang is so valuable. When these words were spoken, everyone was stunned. Yu Donglei shook her head like a rattle, repeatedly stating that it was not the case. Fang Xiaoxiao was not willing to let her go. Seeing her shaking her head, she raised her voice and spoke again. Could it be that Miss Yu wants to spend 20? That's impossible. I know the situation at Miss Yu's home. Let alone 20 little goldfish, even these 2 would be hard to come up with. Yu Donglei was so angry at her next words. Wasn't this just a disguised way of saying that she was poor? But then Fang Xiao stretched out her small hand and stepped on tiptoe, and was able to stand on the same level as Pei Yang, who was 1.8 meters tall. She put her arms around Pei Yang's neck with a playful smile on her face. However, even if Miss Yu is really willing to sell these two little goldfish, I may not be willing to sell them. It's getting late. If you have nothing else, please leave the hospital. Before Yu Donglei could react, she heard Fang Xiaoxiao say, "See her off, again." He Jinyan suppressed his smile, stood up and made a gesture to her. "Humph. Fang Xiaoxiao, just wait for me. Sooner or later, I will teach you a lesson." Yu Donglei uttered a harsh word, snorted coldly, and walked out of the room. After this incident, He Jinyan no longer had the mood to test Fang Xiaoxiao. We can only find another opportunity. The next morning, after working overtime last night, Fang Xiaoxiao managed to make a lot of pills again. As usual, he took them to the pharmacy to sell them for silver, and then took the remaining for sons back home. Since the government has signed the agreement, we can only follow the rules. As soon as she walked out of the yard, she felt like someone was following her. When I turned around to look, I didn't see anything. This is strange. Could it be that I didn't get enough rest last night, causing me to become nervous? I shook my head and continued walking. In front of the drugstore, she first looked at the bustling streets around her, thinking about how she had just come here and how she felt like she was being followed. Now that I am in a busy city, nothing should go wrong. Fang Xiaoxiao shook her head and put it behind her. As soon as she stepped into the pharmacy, she found that there were pills that looked exactly like her own. So I found the waiter. "What's going on with you? Didn't we agree that I would provide the pills?" The waiter folded his hands across his chest and his nose was turned up high. "This is something our store developed ourselves. Why would we need a country woman like you to provide it?" It is said that there is no business without fraud, and Fang Xiaoxiao finally understood. This guy is definitely a big profiteer. They take their own achievements and claim them as their own, and shamelessly say that they were developed by their store. It's so infuriating. At this time, the drugstore owner walked out, and when he saw that it was the man from yesterday, he looked disgusted. "What are you arguing about? If you want to buy medicine, buy it quickly. If not, don't delay our business." Chapter 7 by another person. Fang Xiaoxiao was carrying a bamboo basket on her back. Due to her thin figure, she looked like someone who could be bullied at will. The drugstore owner saw him still standing in the store. He looks poor and doesn't seem like a capable person. What's more, he also heard that she threatened to kill 7 useless husbands. It was really ridiculous. Not only was he trying to fool people with a broken pill, but he almost got himself into trouble. It turns out that making pills is so simple, why should I pay a high price to buy them from them? Get out now and don't interfere with our business here. The drugstore owner and his waiter kicked her out of the store. Fang Xiaoxiao was driven out by the other party just like that. Forget about it, counterfeit goods exist in every era. There is no choice but to keep moving forward. Anyway, I just checked out the pills sold in the drugstore, and they are just for show. The next 2 hours, she went from one drugstore to another selling her pills. But in the end, they all rejected me on the grounds that they had never met and were afraid to have sex. Oh, I didn't expect there would be so many pedantic people. She sighed and continued looking for buyers on the street. The sun hung high in the sky, scorching the earth. The weather in ancient times was good, but it's a little too hot. Fang Xiaoxiao covered her forehead with her hands and looked up at the cloudless sky. The temperature in this weather is probably around 40 degrees Celsius, it's easy to get heat stroke. You know, if no one treats heat stroke in time, people may die. Fortunately, she developed a heat relief medicine. Take one pill and put it in your mouth first. Bang! She had just taken 2 steps when a man with a white beard fell to the ground in front of her. This sudden change scared the people around so much that they all turned their heads to look. But they just looked at each other and no one came forward to help. Fang Xiaoxiao hurriedly squatted down and first used her hand to feel the other person's breath. Fortunately, there was breath. Then he pried open the gentleman's eyelids, took a look, and then took out the heat-relieving pills from the medicine bottle. After feeding her husband, she dragged him with great effort to the shade of the eaves behind her. A moment's effort. The gentleman woke up slowly, coughed for a moment, and then looked at the woman beside him. The woman was beautiful and looked like a noble lady, but she was dressed very simply, which made him very curious. Fang Xiaoxiao saw him wake up, and in order to prevent him from fainting again, she took out the medicine bottle and took out 2 pills. "Sir, this is my homemade pill, it can relieve the symptoms of heat stroke caused by this hot climate." The gentleman looked at the pills in his hand and exclaimed that there was such a medicine. It was the first time he had seen it in his life. "I wonder if this medicine is still available. What's the meaning? Could it be that you want to get more for free?" She had to make money from these pills. Giving the other party 3 pills just now was already her utmost kindness. How could there be such a shameless person? Fang Xiaoxiao frowned and wanted to tell the other party that there was no. However, she felt that this was inappropriate. What if someone walked slowly through the drugstore and saw her selling pills? That would be extremely embarrassing. The gentleman smiled, knowing that his words might have caused the other party to misunderstand him. He took out a tael of silver from his sleeve. "Girl, this is a small token of my gratitude for your help and rescue just now." He then took out another ounce of silver from his sleeve. "It's pill money. 3 pills, 2 taels of silver. This is not as cost-effective as selling it to the pharmacy for 10 taels a bottle." Fang Xiaoxiao began to calculate in her mind, but it was all in vain, as it would cost a huge sum of money to open a pharmacy. It's better to be realistic and take the money and continue to sell the pills. She just stood up and wanted to say goodbye to her husband. "I'm so sorry, sir. I have something else to take care of right now, so I can't sit with you any longer." The gentleman stroked his grey beard and said, "Is the girl looking for a buyer? How do you know? I just saw you walking out of various pharmacies. Seeing how disappointed you look, I guess you've run into obstacles everywhere." "It's okay, thank you for your concern, sir." Fang Xiaoxiao stood up, dusted herself off, and was about to leave. But he was stopped by the other party with just one word. "If you don't mind, I am willing to buy pills from you for a long time. The price is 15 taels of silver per bottle." 15 taels. This is half the price of the previous pharmacy. Without thinking, she immediately took out all the stock from the bamboo basket. Just enough to fill a whole bottle of pills. This is the result of her hard work. If there weren't 3 useless people at home, one of them wanted to kill me, and the other one was mysterious and no one knew what he was doing. There is another one that cannot be seen at the moment, all he does is eat and sleep. She reached a cooperation with the other party, and in the future, whenever she made pills, she would come here to trade with the other party. Apart from feeling a little strange, everything else is fine. After all, it's real money. Take the money and say goodbye to the other person. Fang Xiaoxiao thought that since she had a stable income this time, she must go to the Yarman and bring another husband home. But this time, she had to act carefully. You must find someone who can carry it on his shoulders and lift it in his hands, and it would be best if 1 steamed bun can be used to plough 3 miles of land. Arrived at the Yarman. The bailiff was already used to this, so he crossed his legs and held a small teapot in his hand. "Hey, the 7 girls are here." The 7 women he mentioned is just another name for Fang Xiaoxiao marrying 7 useless husbands. Now she is a prominent figure in the county, and many people have heard that there is a woman in the county. This woman went with 7 men, all of them were weak and feeble looking, and were completely useless. Now it has become a topic of conversation among people after dinner. Fang Xiaoxiao was too lazy to pay attention to the other party, so she took out 5 taels of silver plus 1 tael. "Please help me find someone who has some strength to plough the fields." When the bailiff saw him, he looked around at first, but saw that no one was looking at him. He then quickly reached out to take it, his expression changed from normal, and he said with a smile, Okay. I think you are an honest person. I might as well help you take a look." The 2 men came to where the 4 men were imprisoned. After watching several people playing chess, the bailiff pointed at one of them. "This man has a heroic face and is slightly stronger than the other 3. Let's take him. Take him back and give him a good training. He should be good." Fang Xiaoxiao nodded and took it out. Out of the Yarman. The man lowered his head and said nothing, but he was very grateful in his heart. He was not good at speaking, he only knew that it was the woman in front of him who saved him. Otherwise, he might be arrested and forced to do hard labor. Then one's hatred cannot be avenged. Fang Xiaoxiao returned to the courtyard carrying the bamboo basket. The 3 men in the courtyard were chatting happily and joking about the news they heard outside today. "Brother, if Miss Fang knew that she had become a joke outside, Would she be so angry that she would vomit blood? Hey, third brother, how can you criticize my wife in your heart? You must not let her hear it. I don't think it's a big deal. It's just that she's a loose woman. Chapter 8. It's worth the money. Slutty woman. As soon as Fang Xiaoxiao opened the gate, she heard a few people criticizing her like gossips. What a bunch of ungrateful people. I work so hard outside trying to earn money to support my family. Not only are you guys ungrateful, you've also learned how to gossip behind people's backs. What do you guys mean? He Jinian pretended not to hear, stood up, picked up the axe beside him, and walked towards the pile of firewood. Hoo-har, hoo-har. There were constant sounds coming from his mouth, and he was waving the hatchet in his hand like an old man who couldn't split a piece of wood for a long time. Murong Changqing had already run to the stove and started tinkering with the technique he had figured out yesterday on how to cook noodles. Fang Xiaoxiao was very angry with these two people. She wanted to say a few more words, but Pei Yang had a cold look on his face and just sipped his tea. Hey, this tea tastes terrible. I might as well just drink well water. Pei Yang's mouth was full of disgust as he looked forward. Only then did he notice that there was a man following Fang Xiaoxiao. The other person was much taller than him, and his square face revealed a unique murderous aura that only people who had experienced life and death possessed. I had also been hovering between life and death before, and I managed to escape with great difficulty. This feeling is not something that ordinary people can have, only those who have experienced it can express it. The same was true for Long Jinyang. When he just stepped into the door, he saw Pei Yang sitting in the middle seat, drinking tea. The first feeling this person gave him was that the other person had an experience that seemed familiar to him. And from the other person's every move, one can sense that he has extraordinary skills. Who is Fang Xiaoxiao and why would she marry such a person? He didn't dare to say much, but he made up his mind. If the person in front of him dared to have any conspiracy against Fang Xiaoxiao, he would definitely kill him. Pei Yang had just taken 2 sips when he was startled by the sudden murderous intent. What's going on? Fang Xiaoxiao was too lazy to pay attention to Pei Yang. The key point was that she didn't dare to offend him now. What should I do if someone sneaks into my room in the dead of night and slashes my neck with a knife? Forget it, it's better to have less trouble than more. She turned her head and was about to say that Long Jinyang should go and have a rest first and start working tomorrow. But the man was very sharp-sighted. He immediately ran to the chopping board and snatched the axe from He Jinyan's hand. Brother, get out of the way. Brother, come here. He Jinyan groaned, but suddenly had an idea. As he followed the other person's move away from him, his body fell to the side. Oh, brother, you are so strong, it hurts me so much. Fang Xiaoxiao could tell at a glance that he was a match fixer. A grown man was made like a green tea. If it were my era, I would have been drowned in spit long ago. Pei Yang still kept a cold face and watched He Jinyan act. Long Jinyang felt that he didn't seem to have used much strength, so how come he just fell to the ground? So he raised the hatchet, bent down and stretched out his hand. Brother, are you okay? You are too weak. Come practice dancing with me tomorrow. No, brother, I am a scholar and I don't want to be associated with you. Fang Xiaoxiao couldn't bear to watch it anymore and had to ask them to stop. Long Jinyang nodded and continued chopping wood. It was also said that this was probably the best deal he had ever made. I found 3 useless people, and this time I finally found someone who can help me. She nodded in satisfaction, then put on the bamboo basket and looked at the sun, which was not too dazzling. She could still go to the mountain to pick some herbs. I had to hurry up and rescue the remaining 3 people to avoid being arrested and locked up later. She gave a few instructions, asking everyone to get along well with each other and to be brothers from now on, and then left in a hurry. And the people who stayed alone. Pei Yang and his friends were cracking melon seeds and watching Long Jinyang chopping wood with great effort. They were more or less jealous. The key point was why this guy had to perform so hard. Isn't it better for him to be a waste? He Jinyan couldn't bear to watch it any longer, so he lowered his head and whispered in Pei Yang's ear. I think we need to give this guy a hard time, give him a beating. Otherwise, how can we put our faces aside if he does this? Pei Yang touched his chin, his eyes revealing coldness. You are right. If this boy works so hard, wouldn't we look even more useless in front of the lady? Murong Changqing held the clear soup noodles, sipped a few mouthfuls and asked the 2 if they wanted to eat more, but they both shook their heads. He put the 2 bowls of noodles into his own bowl and started eating them in big mouthfuls. By the time He Jinyan thought about eating first and then doing anything else, it was already too late. In front of the stone table, there was nothing in the bowl except clear soup. The same is true for Pei Yang. The two looked at each other, then looked down at their stomachs that were making growling sounds. Murong Changqing touched the oil on the corner of his mouth and licked the bottom of his wrist with his tongue. After some operations, he burped with satisfaction. Shu Chan, next time if you're not hungry, you can tell me first, so I don't have to eat your food. Pei Yang was speechless, swallowed his saliva, and ignored the other party. At this time, Long Jinyang had finally finished chopping the firewood pile in the yard. Those piles neatly stacked in the corner of the yard are like works of art. But He Jinyan and Pei Yang were so angry that their teeth itched, and even Murong Changqing felt that the other party was really going too far. He just chopped wood, and he did it so well. Doesn't this just express that he and his 2 brothers are useless? Pei Yang asked He Jinyan to give Long Jinyang more things to do. He Jinyan chuckled. Brother Jinyang, you're working too slowly. It took you hours to finish chopping the firewood in the yard. Look, there aren't many decent tables and chairs at home. Go and fix them up. Don't procrastinate anymore. Long Jinyang turned around and said, okay, then started to work again. The 3 of them were like princes, watching Long Jinyang busying around with a calm demeanor. He also points fingers at it from time to time. Fang Xiaoxiao glanced at the herbs in the bamboo basket and calculated in his mind how many pills he could make. Today's harvest was quite fruitful. Not only did I find a reliable buyer, but I also found a husband who can plough the fields. The key is that he is particularly handsome and sunny. Well, not bad, not bad. I will save money to marry the other 3 and then open a medicine store or something. I can live a happy life. She happily carried the bamboo basket, thinking about going home quickly. When I opened the door, I saw that the 3rd uncle was still in the yard, and he had learned to command Long Jinyang. This made her want to criticize a few people, but she felt it was unnecessary. Since they don't work, they can forget about having a good meal in the future. Fang Xiaoxiao took out a piece of cake from her arms. She bought this on her way to the government office. I originally wanted to reward myself, but now, of course, I want to reward those who can do things. She walked up to Long Jinyang and said, take a rest first. You have done so much work today. Come, my wife will reward you with a piece of cake. Open your mouth, Fang Xiaoxiao fed the other person as if she was feeding a child, and even opened her mouth to demonstrate. Long Jinyang was deeply touched by her care. Chapter 9 Jealousy. Although Long Jinyang was a powerful and invincible general before, but now he was like a child, standing there stupidly, at a loss as to what to do, with only one thought in his mind, which was to open his mouth. Fang Xiaoxiao took the osmanthus cake and stretched out her hand to his open mouth. Her action made the 3 people sitting at the stone table so angry that their teeth chattered. Pei Yang snorted coldly and said to the 2 people beside him, look at how indecent this is. How can this be the demeanor of a lady from a noble family? This is simply too shameless. Brother Pei is right. We despise such pretentious behavior and should stop it. Brothers, I want to eat too. He Jinyan rolled his eyes at Murong Changqing beside him. This guy only knows how to eat all day long and has no sense of crisis. Now Long Jinyang is very much in Fang Xiaoxiao's attention. If they don't take some action, they will definitely fall out of favor. He didn't want to leave here so early. He had finally found a place to hide his identity. He Jinyan glanced at Pei Yang beside him, wanting to ask him what he thought. Who would have thought that Pei Yang acted as if he didn't care at all, and even had the leisure to taste the unknown tea in his hand? The tea tastes very bitter at first, but has a sweet aftertaste. He had once lived a life of luxury and had tasted many famous teas, but none as good as the taste of the teacup in his hand. Young General Fang Xiao gave all the osmanthus cakes in her hand to Long Jinyang. She wanted to let everyone know that only by working can they get good food. This is a strategy that kills 3 birds with 1 stone and has been proven to work every time. Long Jinyang was happy, but he stuffed the pastry back into his wife's hands. My dear, I will only eat 1 piece of this cake, and you can keep the rest for yourself to enjoy. That won't work. I said I'll give you all, so I'll give you all. Fang Xiaoxiao shook her head and refused to accept it. Since something has been given away, it is like water poured out. How can it be recovered? Work hard, Jin Yang. When I make a lot of money, I'll sell you new clothes. New clothes are luxury for poor people. It is impossible to buy new clothes throughout the year. Even landlords would have to wait until the Chinese New Year before buying cloth to make new clothes. Long Jinyang knew all of this. Although he was a general, 5 or 6 years had passed in a flash while he was wearing the military uniform. His clothes were all bought 3 years ago. Later, due to the emperor's suspicion, he planned to poison himself. I think this outfit has been worn for more than half a year and has become full of holes. Fortunately, I can mend it myself. This way you can see what's in front of you and it can play a certain role in shielding your body. When Fang Xiaoxiao mentioned buying new clothes, she saw Long Jinyang wearing a patched and worn-out grey linen gown. Well, you rebuild the stove. If you do a good job, tomorrow your wife and I will go to the street to sell the pills. I'll go get some cloth and make you a new set of clothes. She spoke loudly, and did so on purpose so that those lazy guys could hear her. Each of them spent 5 taels of silver plus 500 coins, only to find that the item was worthless when brought home. No one would be happy about this. What is the use of being handsome? Can it make a living? If she hadn't said it out of her mind and asked for 7 pretty boys at once, how could she have brought them home? Looking around, the dilapidated little tiled house looked so desolate. After traveling here, you become a shrew before you can even be a rich wife for a day. She felt somewhat unwilling, and what was even more hateful was that Pei Ying wanted to kill her. I have to think of a way to get rid of him. And at the same time, the 3 of them sat at the stone table, looking at each other. They all heard that Fang Xiaoxiao was going to buy new clothes for Long Jinyang tomorrow. He Jinyan spoke. I think I should do some work. Maybe I can get a new set of clothes. You are useless. It's just a piece of clothing. Pei Yang originally wanted to say, how could this prince be interested in such rubbish? But when the words were on the tip of his tongue, he realized his current status. He was the current crown prince of Daryu dynasty, but he was harmed by a villain and had to find a place to hide. However, while escaping from pursuit, he was accidentally captured by a group of Yarman runners and asked to go on a blind date. He Jinyan glanced at the other person. Ben what? Pei Yang immediately added. It's a good thing. We should show our kindness and help our wife share some of the housework. Forehead. Murong Changqing wiped the saliva from the corner of his mouth and spoke in a serious voice. That's right, you two will take the next step. As he said this, he turned around and ran to Fang Xiaoxiao. Although his expression was also cold, he still bent down and picked up the hatchet on the ground. Looking at him, he looks like he's about to chop wood. Fang Xiaoxiao pointed to the neatly stacked firewood in the courtyard. Stop pretending. If you really want to help, clean up the yard. Seeing this, He Jinyan ignored Pei Yang and went to the inner room happily. Pei Yang would certainly not lag behind others. He took a look at the pots and pans placed on the stove, rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Fang Xiaoxiao smiled complacently when she saw this, then turned around and went back to the small hut in the yard where the firewood was stored. Their hut was a place she cleaned up yesterday and used for grinding and making pills. After closing the door, she finally had time to start her own work. You know, a bottle of pills weighs 15 taels, if you can make 2 bottles a day. Then the whole family would have a source of food. The next day was crisp. Fang Xiaoxiao went to the mountain to collect herbs as usual. At noon, she provided cooling and detoxifying pills according to the discussion with the old gentleman. There are abundant medicinal herbs on the mountain, and she can find what she needs by picking them randomly. After a busy morning, the harvest was quite fruitful. She asked a few people to look after the house while she went to the streets of the town. The sun was shining as usual, making people dizzy and even unable to see the road clearly. I finally reached the destination I had discussed with the old man by relying on my willpower. But she waited and waited, but the old man never came. This made her feel worried, fearing that the other party would stand her up. Fortunately, the old man was holding a wine gourd in his hand and was drinking as he walked towards her. The old man walked up to her, still a little tipsy. Old man, I'm not talking to you. I just passed by the south of the city and smelled the aroma of wine, and my stomach was full of greed. This has delayed our journey a little, I hope you will forgive me, young lady. Fang Xiao looked at the other party and thought, since he had come, she would just hand over the money and the goods. This is yesterday's medicine. The old man took it in his hands and looked at it carefully. He always felt that something was missing, and he also had the question of the specific name of the pill, so he asked Fang Xiaoxiao all at once. Chapter 10 Trouble Comes. Fang Xiaoxiao thought about it and felt that this medicine should indeed be given a name. What is that called? Got it. She looked at the old man and smiled. The name of this medicine is Jeshu pills. Heat-relieving pills, what a great name. The old man stroked his goatee and nodded thoughtfully. Although this thing looks ordinary and even its medicinal uses are very common, after taking one of it, you can feel a lot more comfortable all over. The two were trading. A rough voice came from behind. Well, you fraud, you came to my store to buy the new products from the pharmacy. The owner of the drugstore was fat and wheezed when he walked. But his voice was like a loud bell, causing passers-by around him to stop and want to find out what was going on. The waiter from the store followed behind him. The two of them walked quickly, one in front and one behind. Fang Xiaoxiao turned around and found that it was the owner of the drugstore she had cooperated with before. Seeing the crowd watching, the other party felt even more proud. He was resting in the store yesterday, but the waiter came to tell him that he saw the woman selling pills everywhere. You know, this pill is now the best-selling item in his store. How can he let this person disrupt his business? The drugstore owner strode up to the two men. He wanted to snatch the medicine bottle from the old man in front of him. Before the old man could even open his mouth, it was snatched away by the other party. The drugstore owner shouted to the crowd around him with a laugh. Dear fellow villagers, these are the special pills made in my shop. As he spoke, he pointed at Fang Xiaoxiao and continued. Who would have thought that the things in the store would be stolen by this person? Everyone should take a closer look at this thief's face. At once, everyone began to denounce. They all knew the owner of Eurojatang and had seen the pills in the store. This is a very novel medicine. Not only does it seem to be much more convenient than decoctions, it only needs to be taken with water. It is also no longer bitter and difficult to swallow, which is extremely convenient. I've seen this thing before. It's a new product from shopkeeper Zhang's store. I went there to buy it the day before yesterday. Yes. I didn't expect that such shameful behavior would occur in our Changle town. I suggest that manager Zhang should report it to the authorities and let them handle it. The crowd's voices were very loud, and they were all shouting to report to the police. Zhang Yaocai held the medicine bottle and looked proudly at Fang Xiaoxiao, who had been silent all this time, thinking to himself, let's see how you fight me. You are selling pills and blocking my way to making money. I must put you in jail today. The reason why he did this was not only to make money. On the other hand, he was afraid that his boss would find out that he had stolen someone else's craftsmanship in making the pills. Fang Xiaoxiao comforted the old gentleman at this time. I'm sorry to scare you. She has to appease this financial sponsor, in case he really stops cooperating with her because of this. Then she would have to eat dirt, and there were 4 mouths to feed at home. The old man waved his hand and smiled. No problem. I trust you. The sponsor is really generous and decent. Fang Xiaoxiao was almost broken by the other party's words and almost wanted to cry. But of course, it was impossible for her to cry. I had long guessed that a villain like Zhang Yaocai would never allow me to make medicine with peace of mind and look for buyers everywhere. Fortunately, she did some tricks when she sold the pills to the other party for the first time. Zhang Yaocai was in a very good mood at this time, and was even waiting for the people from the Yarman to come and arrest people. Wait, what are you doing? A handsome man dressed in blue, who looks like Korean opera Do Minjun. When Fang Xiaoxiao looked at the other person, her little heart couldn't help but beat wildly. Although he is not as handsome as the man at home, he is still a top-notch handsome guy, not to mention a Korean opera. There is a hint of masculinity in her femininity, which is simply the best. When Li Rumo was about to open his mouth to question Zhang Yaocai what was going on, he saw the fairy in his dream in his peripheral vision. Fairy? He pushed away the shopkeeper who was blocking his way and quickly came to the fairy. He was so excited that he even stuttered when he spoke. Fairy, I finally see you in person. Fairy? Fang Xiao tilted her head to look at the other person, then thought about it in her mind, is he a fool? Otherwise, who would start talking in their sleep in broad daylight? Seeing that Zhang Yaocai was very respectful to the man in front of him, she thought he must be an important person. Please forgive me for making fun of you, my name is not Fairy. May I ask if you are acquainted with Zhang Yaocai? Can you make the decision for me? Upon hearing this, Li Rumo turned around and looked at his own shopkeeper. When he inspected the store yesterday, he felt it was very strange. With his own knowledge of medicinal materials, how could he come up with this method of making medicine? It seems that I have come to the right place today. Not only can I meet the fairy in my dreams, but I can also solve the confusion in my heart. Don't worry, young lady. If this pill was really made by you, I will definitely seek justice for you and compensate you for all your losses. When Fang Xiaoxiao heard this, she felt lucky to meet such an open-minded and handsome man. It was a pity that his family was too rich. Even in the Dayu dynasty, men could be bought and sold. But wealthy families must have some strength and are not bound by these rules and regulations. She didn't waste any time and directly snatched the medicine bottle from Zhang Yaocai's hand. In front of everyone, he took out a bran pill from the medicine bottle. She showed the pills in her hand to the people around her. Everyone, take a closer look. Is this on the same level as what they have at Yerojitan? This pill is yellowish-brown in color, and is completely different from the pills sold by Yerojitan. The pill in her hand was unprecedented in both color and luster. Even though Li Rumo traveled all over the country looking for the best formula, it was still not as good as the small pill in front of him. Miss, can you please spare me a moment to talk? He didn't want to make a big deal about it. After all, it was not a glorious thing. Just by seeing the pill in the fairy's hand, he had a rough idea of the final answer in his mind. That is, Zhang Yaocai stole other people's achievements and shamelessly said that they were his own ideas and actions. Zhang Yaocai wanted to defend himself, but Li Moru would never work for such a person again. Not only is the pharmacy unwilling to accept him, but no one in the entire Dayu kingdom will accept him. This is the consequence of deceiving the Li family. The matter has finally come to an end. Fang Xiaoxiao snatched the medicine bottle from the man in front of her and handed the pills to the old man with a smile. One hand pays, the other hand delivers the goods. She spread out her fair little hands, and you couldn't tell at all that the other person was a poor person. These hands don't look like the hands that have done farm work or gone up the mountain to collect herbs. The old man just glanced at her, took out the money and handed it to her. Okay. When Fang Xiaoxiao saw the money, her mouth opened wide. She could finally go home now. Chapter 11 Tracking. Young General Fang Xiao put the silver in his arms with a smile on his face. Now I have 15 taels of silver, with which I can go to the Yarman again to choose a husband. Just as she was about to leave, she heard someone calling her from behind. Miss Fang, please stay. Li Moru walked quickly behind her. Fang Xiaoxiao screamed, turned around and was almost killed by the other party. Oh my god, the baby is scared to death. She patted her chest, took 2 steps back with disgust, and kept a certain distance from the other person. You're trying to scare me to death. Why are you shouting so loudly in broad daylight? Li Moru looked at the woman in front of him, who was about 2 steps away from him. She looked like a fairy and was dressed in coarse linen grey clothes. The fairy he saw in his dream the day before was the person in front of him. Miss Fang, I am here to apologize. If I have offended you, please forgive me. He sounds so pretentious and you can tell at first glance that he is not a serious person. Fang Xiaoxiao shook her head to indicate that it was nothing and that she was very busy now, so she decided not to chat with the other party anymore. Before she left, she said that one must learn to be a good person before doing business in the future. Li Moru stood there in a daze, with a smile on his face, but he already had a plan in his mind. What an interesting woman. Fang Xiaoxiao had 15 taels of silver in her pocket and thought that it was still early, so she went back home first. Anyway, there are only 3 left, I will go and marry them home in a few days. Of course there is another important reason, that is, 3 fewer people means 3 fewer mouths to feed, so every bit saved counts. It is not easy to make money. You have to learn to make the most of $1. The path back home is surrounded by bamboo forests, and all you see is green. There was a muddy dirt road under my feet. Because it had rained last night, the ground was soft and there was no concrete road to hurt my feet. In her previous life, she had to wear high heels every day, which made walking very uncomfortable and also rubbed her heels. If she didn't work in a crappy job and earn that little money, she wouldn't bother to wear it. Now, wearing my old cloth shoes with 1,000-layer soles, not only is it comfortable to walk in, but the road surface is also very soft. It's true, the ancient times were great. The air was fresh, the population was sparse, and you could easily live in the house of your dreams. A small courtyard and a few tiled houses, simple and nothing to worry about, and 4 husbands, each one of them is very handsome. Come on Fang Xiaoxiao, you are the best. It's just supporting 7 grown men. What's so great about that? You are a time traveler. She carried a bamboo basket on her back, cheering herself up while enjoying the scenery along the way. I had only taken a few steps when I was not far from my doorstep when I saw a sneaky figure looking around like a thief. Fang Xiaoxiao hurriedly stopped, bent down and hid in the bamboo forest nearby. She only saw that the man was wearing a grey robe and a bamboo hat and looked strange. Hey, isn't that He Jianyan? The wind blew the veil in front of He Jianyan's hat, revealing a corner of his handsome face. He quickly pulled down the hat that was blown up by the wind and covered his face with it again. He lowered his head and looked around for a moment to ensure that the operation was foolproof. After finding that there was indeed no one around, he walked forward with confidence. It's strange, what is He Jianyan doing? There must be a secret. The last time she met He Jianyan, he was talking to a man in black and was investigating something. I don't know what the survey is about, but her favorite thing to do is to watch the fun. See He Jianyan leaving towards the back mountain. Fang Xiaoxiao also followed carefully and quickly. This experience was really good. She was not very good at following people, but once her curiosity was aroused. It was just like the Yellow River flooding and it was out of control. One is in front and the other is behind. The 2 of them played a game of cat and mouse. But just when Fang Xiaoxiao saw him arrive at his destination. But it turned out to be an abandoned mine. In her previous life's memory, this was where she played as a child. Strange, why come to the mine? At this moment, a big hand reached out to her. Don't move. Why are you following me all the way? What is your purpose? Fang Xiaoxiao had her mouth and nose covered by the other party. She blinked and shook her head to indicate that she didn't. But He Jianyan was unwilling to believe it. He had been following him to their mine since he left home. Ordinary people don't have so much free time, they must have some plans. Although Fang Xiaoxiao had only been in contact with the other party for a few days, the other party's style of doing things was completely different from that of ordinary people. Take the pills for example, it is impossible for ordinary people to think of such a way of making them. What's more, there are some good medicines to relieve summer heat, which he has never heard of or seen before. Thinking of this, he took out a dagger from his waist and put it to her throat. Who are you? Who? I am your wife, who else could I be? Fang Xiao was extremely angry, but she had to bow her head and not dare to act rashly. Mainly in the larynx, there is a cool feeling. This was not the first time that someone had held a gun around his neck. Last time it was Pei Yan who did this, and this time it was He Jianyan who did it. What are these 2 trying to do? There is no need to talk about Pei Yan, after all, I saved his life. But for He Jianyan, she only spent 5 taels of silver plus 500 coins in customs duties to buy him. Her heart was trembling, and she regretted that her curiosity killed the cat. He Jianyan looked her up and down, wondering in his heart what her true identity was. Could it be? He didn't say anything else, just asked him to be quiet. Fang Xiaoxiao blinked her eyes quickly. She didn't want to be killed like this. No matter what, you have to live to the end. How can the plot be ruined as soon as the protagonist appears? This is a joke. Unless she is a supporting role. He Jianyan let go of the dagger in his hand with some doubt, glanced at it again, and then put the dagger back into the scabbard at his waist. I'm going to do something big now. You can come with me or not. It's up to you. Fang Xiao thought carefully, if she left without finding out the truth, then she would have endured his threats in vain. She nodded to indicate that it was okay. The 2 of them set off towards their destination, one in front of the other. On their way, Fang Xiaoxiao wanted to ask the other party several times what was going on, but he signaled her to shut up every time. She said, "Oh," lowered her head, and followed the other person slowly. This mine is very large, with rocks piled up all around, and there is no end in sight. Fang Xiaoxiao looked at the rugged and winding path in front of her, and then looked at the endless section of overgrown weeds in front of her. This is a double test of physical strength and endurance. Just now when they were at the mine entrance, she complained that it was difficult to walk. Now, the road ahead is not only difficult to walk on, but also requires climbing. Can you please slow down? My calves are almost cramping. Can you take a break? She supported her knees with her hands, bent down and looked up at the person walking in front of her, who was about 10 or 20 meters away. At this moment she really regretted it. Why did she nod in agreement? Chapter 12 Mine Exploration. The two walked for about half an hour and finally reached the depths of the mine. This place is surrounded by trees on all sides, which is completely different from the mine entrance we were just at. Fang Xiaoxiao followed behind He Jinyan. She looked around and didn't find anything unusual. Just on their way here, He Jinyan told me that the purpose of coming to their mine this time was to find the missing people during this period. Based on the information obtained by his subordinates, He Jinyan roughly speculated that the missing people were most likely hidden in this area. As for the exact location, he himself did not know. In order to save time, He Jinyan suggested that the two of them should explore separately, and as long as they found the target, they would ignite the signal discussed in their hands. Fang Xiaoxiao took the bamboo tube he handed over. This bamboo tube is about the thickness of one's wrist, with a hemp rope at the end and the end covered with red paper. It looks similar to the latte art we played with when we were kids. The wisdom of ancient people is truly unfathomable. She couldn't help but admire in her heart. You know, firearms had not been invented at that time, and black powder was only used in the making of fireworks and firecrackers. When Fang Xiaoxiao thought about this, she suddenly had a bold idea. If she could come up with some black technology based on the ratio, wouldn't she be able to become the king? It's a nice idea to think about, but forget it. Let us just be low-key in our actions and high-profile in our life. He put the signal gun in his hand on his waist, carried the bamboo basket on his back, said hello to He Jinyan, and walked towards the depths of the woods on the right. He Jinyan stood there and watched Fang Xiaoxiao gradually disappear into the woods. He seemed to be thinking about something. Did I guess wrong? He shook his head to give up the idea, then turned and ran towards the woods on the left. In the old courtyard of the Fang family, Pei Yang was still sitting at the stone table, holding a book in his hand. He raised his eyes and looked towards the wooden door of the courtyard. It's strange. It's already the evening hour and the sun is setting. Why haven't you returned home yet? Master Pei, are you wondering why your wife hasn't come back yet? Murong Chanqing walked to the stone table with noodle soup in his hand. He blew away the hot steam in the bowl, took a sip, and then spoke slowly. Pei Yang glanced at the other person but didn't say anything. Murong Chanqing was not upset and just took another sip of the noodle soup. No need to wait. My wife is having a tryst with Mr. He. Although you and I are no less handsome than Mr. He. But you know, Mr. He can always make Madame Fang smile when he says that. This is not something you and I can do, not to mention Master Pei Yang. I know you still want to kill Madame Fang. Pei Yang didn't care what Fang Xiaoxiao and He Jinyan were doing, but he heard the last sentence he said. According to what he said, he must have discovered some of his own secrets. Without saying a word, Pei Yang took out a dagger from his waist and was about to stab Murong Chanqing in the throat. Oh, Jinyang, save me. Seeing this, Long Jinyang, who was chopping wood at the time, quickly jumped behind the two of them. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Murong Chanqing and threw him behind him. Then he picked up the porcelain bowl in Murong Chanqing's hand to block the dagger that was stabbing at his chest. Bang! Pei Yang only felt a numbness in his hand, and then realized that the dagger had been taken away by the other party. Long Jinyang held the dagger in his hand and looked at it carefully. This dagger is very exquisite. The wood used for the handle is ebony, and there are subtle dragon patterns carved on the handle, which are hard to find without careful observation. The blade is made of fine black iron and feels quite heavy in the hand. As a great general of his country, the things in his hands were naturally extraordinary. But why is it in the hands of this person in front of me who can't carry it and is injured? Could it be that the other party is? Thinking of this, he was a little surprised, but he was not 100% sure, so he had to smile. Brother Pei, your attack is too vicious. Every move is fatal. I wonder what Brother Murong said wrongly to make you so angry. Pei Yang remained silent and cold. He just felt that the other party was very powerful, and even if he was in his prime, he would not be his opponent. Just now, when he snatched the dagger from my hand, if the other party wanted to kill me, it would be difficult for me to escape from him. Murong Chanqing was thrown to the ground and let out a cry of ouch, ouch. He just felt like a kite with a broken string, floating in the wind. After all, he is a young marquis, and this is the first time he felt that his life was almost in danger. However, Pei Yang's actions further explained his guess that the other party's identity was definitely not simple. What made him even more curious was Long Jinyang. What kind of monster was he? Not only was he extremely strong, but his reaction speed was also terrifyingly fast. If Long Jinyang had stabbed me just now, it would have been impossible for me to dodge it so easily. Everything that happened just now was in his plan, but he was still very curious about Pei Yang's identity. Whether from its temperament or the dagger it took out, it is definitely not an ordinary item, and it may even be related to the palace. In addition, when he passed by the other party's room last night, he vaguely heard something about an assassination. Currently, apart from a great general, there is only one person left who was assassinated outside. Murong Changqing brushed the dust off his body, lay on the ground with a painful look on his face, and looked at the broken bowl in front of him. My bowl, why did you leave me like this? We were together for 3 days and 3 nights in total, and you were by my side during these long days. If you agree not to leave me, I won't abandon you either. He cried so heart-wrenchingly that it was so moving that it moved heaven and earth. Even a general with a heart of stone would be moved at this moment. But Pei Ying didn't have time to act with the other party. On the contrary, Long Jinyang felt very empathetic. He squatted down and patted Murong Changqing on the shoulder. Don't cry, get another one. The bowl is broken and can't be glued together. No, I don't want to believe this is true. Murong Changqing's acting skills were so good that he wanted to describe this bowl as if it were his own son. His fair face was covered with tears and his eyes were moist and bloodshot. Pei Yang stood up and walked up to him, throwing out 1 or 2 ounces of silver from his arms. Take it and buy a new one. You are insulting my character. 3 or 2, no more. Thank you for the insults a few more times. Murong Changqing immediately picked up the silver in front of him and quickly put it in his arms, fearing that it would be taken back by the other party in a second. Long Jinyang was the only one present who failed to react. He was still thinking about how to comfort her. Brother Murong, what are you doing? Murong Changqing dusted off his trouser legs, changed his expression, and glanced with disdain at Long Jinyang, who was squatting on the ground in a daze. I'll go buy a bowl. You just chop the wood and I'll cook noodles for you later. As he spoke, he strode towards the door, no longer looking as pitiful as before. Pei Yang chuckled, with an imperceptible fierceness in his eyes. Chapter 13 Crow's Mouth. As soon as Murong Changqing walked out the door, he saw a sachet. He picked up the sachet on the ground, held it in his hand and examined it carefully. The sachet looked very familiar, so he put it to his nose and sniffed it carefully. It has a strong smell of medicinal herbs and looks like it belongs to Fang Xiao. Besides, there is a word, Xiao, embroidered on it. As far as he knew, other people's sachets all had their surnames embroidered on them, but Fang Xiaoxiao only had Xiao embroidered on it. The last time he saw her was in her boudoir. He felt it was strange at the time, so he asked about it and learned that it was just to be different from others. He thought about it and decided to tell other people about it. Just now when he was outside the door, he saw Fang Xiao following He Jinyan stealthily. I thought it might be fun at the time, but an hour has passed now, and no matter how fun it is, I should come back. Not only did Fang Xiaoxiao not return, but He Jinyan did too. Turning back to the yard, he shouted, holding the sachet in his hand. Oh, this is terrible, I found that Madame Fang actually left the sachet outside the door. Pei Yang glanced coldly and said nothing. But Long Jinyang seemed to have thought of something bad. He quickly walked up to Murong Changqing, snatched the sachet and looked at it. He was always alert and felt something ominous in his heart. Master Murong, I remember that Madame Fang cared a lot about this sachet. Why did she leave it outside the door and never come back to look for it? How would I know? Besides, she is with He Jinyan, so they are probably doing something big. As Murong Changqing spoke, a questioning look appeared on his face. Long Jinyang didn't care about so many things. His intuition told him that there must be something fishy about this matter, and Madame Fang might even be in danger. Think about it. He turned around and said to Pei Yang. I feel that Madame Fang must have met with some kind of harm, which is why she has not been able to return home yet. I will go out and look for her first. Please stay at home, brothers. After he said that, he didn't even turn his head back, and jumped directly towards the courtyard wall, disappearing in front of the 2 people. TSK, knowing martial arts. What's so great about that? I can do it, too. As Murong Changqing spoke, he quickly walked towards the courtyard gate, opened the wooden door and left. Only Pei Yang was left, who was sitting at the stone table and sipping bitter tea. He was actually a little worried about Fang Xiaoxiao, but the two of them had already set off, and he couldn't be as reckless as them. He had to think things through carefully. He took out an emerald green flute from his bosom. The flute was about the size of a middle finger and seemed to be very accurate. It was not something that ordinary people could own. Woo-woo! The piccolo emitted a clear low note. Then two people stood on the top of the courtyard wall, dressed in black and masked, looking particularly mysterious. Pei Yang instructed the two of them in brief words. Looking for someone. The two of them hummed lightly and jumped away over the courtyard wall. He wanted to continue drinking his tea, but for some reason he began to feel uneasy. The tea doesn't smell good, it just tastes like water. After putting down the teacup, he stood up, opened the gate and left. Fang Xiaoxiao searched forward in the woods and heard from He Jinyan that the missing people were all women and children. No need to think, they must be a group of thugs. This, Yarzi, is a human trafficking organization. According to He Jinyan, the Yarzi not only bought and sold human beings, but also did many evil things, such as cutting off the hands and feet of children and using them for begging. Anyway, what they did was really infuriating. She muttered that she would teach those guys a lesson when she saw them, and then she worried about what she would do if she really encountered them. I am just a weak little woman who only knows medical skills. Forget it. I can just blow the signal horn when the time comes. Who are you? Stop right there. Just as Fang Xiaoxiao was shaking the signal flash in her hand. A shout from behind frightened her so much that she stood still, and the bamboo tube in her hand rolled to the ground unconsciously. A group of people holding various weapons appeared in the bushes. Some of them were holding spears, and some were holding broken blades. Leading the group was a giant bald man who looked to be over 1.8 meters tall. The other person was big and strong with a face full of flesh. That arm was almost as thick as my thigh. When Fang Xiaoxiao saw the people coming, she thought something was wrong. They must be that group of fierce gangsters. The big man in particular looked extremely ferocious, just like the villainous mountain bandit in a TV drama. Blood was still dripping from the 9-ring-long sword in the opponent's hand. What should I do? She was so frightened that her whole body began to tremble. It was the first time she encountered real bandits. When I watched it on TV before, I always thought that group of people looked really funny. Although they looked fierce, they acted very stupidly. But when you really meet him, that fierce and violent aura hits you in the face. The bald man saw that it was a very beautiful woman with a bamboo basket on her back. He thought she must have come up the mountain to collect herbs. He had just killed a woman and was worried about having no fresh ones. Now it's good, what you wish for will come true. I'll tie her up for you guys. When I'm done with her, I'll give her to you guys as a reward. Hey, big brother, I want to be the first to try it. Damn it, why are you the first one? The two younger brothers beside the big man started to quarrel with each other, wondering why the other got to enjoy it first. Shut up, everyone. I'll kidnap him first. The two men then stopped what they were doing. One of them took out a hemp rope from his waist and walked quickly to the woman. Fang Xiaoxiao wanted to scream, but her mouth was blocked by an unknown object. She looked down and saw that it was a smelly sock. The thin man next to her was barefoot and grinning at him. Just like that, she was tied up and taken away without knowing what was going on. The place where the tooth is located is an abandoned yard. Fang Xiaoxiao was carried on the big man's shoulders. The bumpy ride made her stomach shake and she felt like vomiting. It's a pity that my mouth was sealed, so I could only force myself to swallow it back into my stomach. Whatever you fear will come true. She looked around and found that the yard was covered with undried scarlet blood stains. Before he could see the surroundings clearly, he was thrown to the ground by the big man. This little girl has fair skin and looks like she'd be good food. The big man bent over with a silly smile, licked his lips and laughed. But when he was about to strip her clothes, a sharp male voice came from the room in front of him. You, stop destroying people. Fang Xiaoxiao looked up when she heard the voice. At this moment, she was thinking about how to get out of this situation. I saw the door in front open, and a man with a very pale face, light steps and holding a white silk in his hand walked out. He looks quite seductive, but I always feel that he is not a real man. Shukong Nanchao walked towards the few people. He walked and coughed, looking like he was about to die. The big man called Erhu was displeased when he saw his elder brother coming back, but he had to bow respectfully to him. "Brother, why are you back?" Chapter 14 The Dumb Boy. Zukongnan snorted coldly and swept his cold eyes over the other person. Erhu suddenly felt numb all over, as if a cold wind was blowing through his body. This made him unconsciously lower his head even lower, fearing that his elder brother would get angry. Zukongnan walked slowly up to the group of people. But it would be better to say that he floated over rather than walked away. Fang Xiaoxiao saw it clearly and thought to herself, "Is this guy a ghost? How come he walks without touching the ground?" But it was very strange, according to the way she looked at the other person's face. His eyes were lifeless and bloodshot, and his cheeks were as pale as white cloth. In this situation, let alone walking, even breathing should be difficult. But this guy could get down to the ground and walk so fast, which shocked her whole world. Zukongnan squatted down, stretched out his hand, which was so white that even women would feel jealous, and touched the little cheek of Fang Xiao, who was lying on the ground in front of him. This woman is stunningly beautiful, and her body exudes a faint fragrance. She is truly a top-notch talent. If it is handed over to the adults, it will surely be very good. As he said this, he slashed Fang Xiao's neck with a knife, knocking her unconscious, and then ordered his men to lock her up. When Erhu saw that Zui Yarzi was about to fly away, his face turned very ugly and the 9-ring-long sword in his hand was tightly clenched. Zukongnan felt a sharp breath beside him, but he didn't care and just spoke lightly. "Why, you want to compete with me?" Erhu was distracted for a moment, took 2 steps back, lowered his head and said nothing. It's not that he didn't want to say yes, but in terms of strength, there was a big gap between him and the other party. If it was a contest of strength, he thought he was not inferior to the other party, but he didn't dare to do so. This Zukongnan was actually not his real elder brother, but someone who appeared suddenly. The other party came to them at that time, and his eldest brother competed with the other party. Even if he joined forces with him, he was defeated by him. Fortunately, he recognized the situation and knelt down to admit his mistake. But the eldest brother was not so courageous and insisted on fighting the opponent, and ended up with no body left. He still remembers the scene of his eldest brother's tragic death, and he can't help but tremble with fear every time he thinks of it. Zukongnan ordered everyone to intensify patrols and told them not to slack off, otherwise they would be punished according to the family rules, and then he went back to the room, leaving Erhu and others standing in the yard. At this time, a younger brother came over and wanted to stand up for his elder brother. Brother who the hell does Zukongnan think he is? How dare he order us around? Erhu wanted to speak, but was told not to say anything more. But suddenly he felt a strong wind passing through his cheek. Whoosh! After this sound of breaking through the air, the little brother fell straight to the ground without even a groan. Looking at the beautiful spot on his forehead, there was only a blood hole the size of a needle. Everyone present was surprised. Only Erhu knew that this was Zukongnan's method. He turned around and looked at his younger brother. Bury the person and stop talking nonsense. Remember, you just need to do your job well. Everyone nodded and dispersed. Fang Xiaoxiao slowly opened her eyes. She had just been hit on the neck by the white-faced man and fell into coma. She could still feel the pain in her neck, so she subconsciously massaged herself with her hands. Fortunately, it's not a big deal, just rub it more. At this moment, she looked around and found that there was a prison cell around her. There were many women squatting behind him, their faces full of fear, some even had blank eyes, and their clothes were in tatters. Even in this cell, there was filth and stench. This must be the place where Jian investigated. At this moment, a little boy in ragged clothes and covered in dirt came to the iron fence in front of him. Fang Xiaoxiao looked up and saw that the child's nose had been cut off, leaving only 2 holes. There was fear in his eyes and he was holding a few steamed buns in his hands. The little boy walked to the iron fence, squatted down, and shook a steamed bun towards her, as if he wanted her to take it. Fang Xiao smiled and waved her hand, indicating that she was not hungry. But the woman behind her started to move. They reached out their hands like hungry wolves to snatch the steamed bun from the boy's hand. In a flash, the 5 steamed buns were taken away by 7 women. Only the little boy was left with a helpless expression. Fang Xiaoxiao walked up to the child and asked, "Did those people do that to your nose?" She looked at the boy's childish face in front of her. The boy was skinny and looked like he had been malnourished for a long time. The little boy nodded, and then his throat made a sound. Mute. Fang Xiaoxiao couldn't help but be startled and looked at his open mouth again. It was discovered that most of the boy's tongue had been cut off, which looked very scary. These beasts not only trafficked in human beings, but their methods were so cruel that they even spared no children. As the little boy spoke, he took out a dusty white flour bun from his arms, wiped it with his sleeve, passed it through the iron fence, and handed it to her. Aha! You want to give it to me? Aha! No, no, keep it for yourself. Sister is not hungry. Fang Xiaoxiao waved her hands repeatedly. The little boy just hummed twice and did not take the steamed bun back from his hand. But the next second, the group of women rushed over again and pushed Fang Xiaoxiao aside. The little boy wanted to take his hand back, but it was too late and the steamed bun was snatched away again. Only this time, the group of women started to fight more with each other. When Fang Xiaoxiao saw this scene, she tried to stop it but found it was of no use. Helpless, she had to look at the little boy's scratched hand first. There were many scratches on the boy's arms, and blood was flowing out. She took off a corner of her clothes and bandaged it to avoid infection. What a bunch of people! Not only did they fight over a steamed bun, but they were also so cruel. The little boy smiled at her, as if to say thank you to her. Fang Xiaoxiao waved her hand to indicate that it was not necessary. At this time, the white-faced man she had just seen walked down the corridor. The other person still gave people the feeling of being about to die, and he still walked as if he was floating. Zhu Kongnan waved at the boy. The boy lowered his head, uttered twice, then stood up and left. Fang Xiaoxiao really hated the person in front of her. Who are you? Why are you arresting me and the person behind me? Don't you know this is against the law? Aren't you afraid of being beheaded? Her series of questions were met with Zhu Kongnan's ridicule. Law, beheading. How ridiculous. Who in the world would dare to do this? I, Zhu Kongnan, have never taken it seriously. Why are you here in this desolate mountain? Fang Xiaoxiao didn't hesitate at all and blurted out that she was collecting herbs everywhere. Zhu Kongnan shook his head and said, collecting herbs? That's ridiculous. This is an abandoned mine. How can there be any herbs here? When they found you just now, they didn't see any herbs in your bamboo basket. Tell me who you are and whether you have any accomplices. She didn't expect that this guy could notice something wrong with himself so quickly. Chapter 15, Looking for my wife. However, I would never admit it even if I were beaten to death. You said it was an abandoned mine. I didn't collect any herbs, so the bamboo basket must be empty. Stop talking nonsense and let me go. Otherwise, if my husband knows that I didn't go home, they will definitely cut you into pieces. Fang Xiaoxiao grabbed the iron fence and stared at him. Zhu Kongnan suddenly felt amused, but then he remembered that the other party was already married. If we hand it over to the higher-ups, wouldn't that be digging our own grave? Zhu Kongnan thought about it and felt something was wrong. He clearly smelled the scent emanating from the woman in front of him, and it didn't sound like she was already a woman. How is it possible that she is married and has several husbands? Zhu Kongnan's first reaction was that the other party was lying to him. Don't fool me. If you are married, why are you still a virgin? How did he know? Fang Xiaoxiao was shocked in her heart but remained calm. When Zhu Kongnan saw that the other party did not answer, he confirmed his judgment. Although the other party's words were a bit outrageous, he had got the answer he wanted. The next step would be to send a pigeon to inform the adult and let him make the decision before taking the person away. Long Jinyang and Murong Chanqing ran between Shanlin. He originally planned to look for Madame Fang alone, but he didn't know the direction she was looking. Just when I was at a loss, I saw someone following me. Murong Chanqing followed him quickly. In order to prevent the other party from discovering that he knew martial arts, he had to run as fast as he could. But after running for more than half an hour, the sky was getting darker, but he still didn't meet Fang Xiaoxiao. This made him very anxious. What would he do if Fan Wan took He Jinyan away? He also wanted to stay in the yard and study how to cook delicious and chewy noodles. Brother Jinyang, can you stop and rest for a while? My legs are almost broken. Long Jinyang turned around and thought the other party had discovered something, but he only heard complaints. He hesitated for a moment and set off again. According to what Madame Fang said before, he usually collects herbs in the mountains. They have now explored the area and found no human figures. There is only one location, which is an abandoned mine not far from here. According to what Murong Changqing said, Madame Fang would definitely not go that way. After all, there was no way any herbs could grow there, as there were bare hills all around. But his intuition told him that Madame Fang might have been there. Long Jinyang paused and said, "I'll go explore the mine first. I have a feeling that Madame Fang will go there." Ill. Murong Changqing had just calmed down his breathing when he saw the other party jump and disappear into the woods. He complained that the other person was not smart and that there was something wrong with him. Who would go to that mine? Fang Xiaoxiao is not an idiot, so how could she possibly run there? I should look for it on the eastern hilltop. Maybe I can see He Jinyan and Fang Xiao doing something shameful. Out of curiosity, he looked around and confirmed that there was no one around. He then took a quick step, rushed towards the woods, and with a light leap, he reached the treetops. Standing on the treetop, he confirmed the hill ahead, jumped up again, and disappeared into the bushes. Only Pei Yang, who was standing not far away, was looking at the two people who disappeared. He had a smile on his face, and in his hand was the secret letter that his men had just intercepted from the carrier pigeon. Huh, I didn't expect it to be related to him, my good second brother. Pei Yang burned the secret letter in his hand with a fire starter and looked in the direction of the mine. Although he didn't know whether the woman mentioned in the letter was Fang Xiaoxiao. But my intuition tells me that it is almost correct. Go check around the mine first, and remember not to alert the enemy. Yes. The men behind him nodded in reply and disappeared into the woods. Pei Yang then walked forward confidently, cursing these guys in his heart, each one hiding more deeply than the other. Especially Murong Changqing, who usually acts like a weakling, always wants to be lazy and only cares about eating. He was greatly shocked by the other party's performance. Who on earth is this Murong Changqing? How could he be so skilled? And that Long Jinyang, I always feel like I've seen him somewhere, but I can't remember where. He shook his head and decided to save people first. If he arrived late and was beaten to it by the others, it would not be a good thing for him. He Jinyan kept searching along the road in front of him until he finally reached the end of the road. He looked ahead and saw a cliff. It seems that I can only turn back and follow the path Fang Xiaoxiao took. Thinking of this, he quickly ran towards the back. Come along and make any discoveries. After he had been running for half an hour, he found a familiar object under the grass. Signal gun. My intuition told me that Fang Xiao was a threat. The thing in his hand was the signal tube he gave to the other party to notify himself. Since the things have been discarded, it means that the person must have met with an accident. Without stopping for too long, he walked quickly forward. At this time, Long Jinyang looked at the fork in the road ahead, one to the left and one to the right. Which way should he go? At this time, he found a few shallow footprints on his left-hand side, which seemed to have been left just now. According to experience, this is to the right. He took a deep breath again and ran to the right. Murong Changqing stood on the top of the cliff with a confused look on his face. Strange, it can't be wrong. Why is there a cliff here? Could it be that Fang Xiaoxiao went to their mine to collect herbs? He stroked his chin and began to review the situation. When He Jinyan is with her, Nasi doesn't look like a serious person, and her brain should be the same. It is really possible that Fang Xiaoxiao could be tricked into going to the mine to collect herbs. Thinking of this, he sighed, and set off again, chasing in the direction of Long Jinyang. Long Jinyang had already arrived at the position in front of him, and he saw a cliff in front of him. I suddenly felt confused and realized that I was thinking too much. I shouldn't have chosen the right side, but should have gone directly to the left. Helplessly, he set out again and headed towards the fork in the road. Pei Yang slowly walked towards the location of the mine. He had already roughly guessed what was going on. He also knew He Jinyan's specific identity, and the other party's purpose in coming here must be to inquire about missing persons. He Jinyan, you are really brave. You even found the case that led to my second brother. I really don't know how many lives you have left. I don't know if you can withstand my second brother's methods. He didn't want to reveal his identity now, so he could only pray in his heart that the other party would not investigate too deeply. Otherwise it wouldn't be much fun. As for the other two, I haven't gotten any useful information yet, and I always feel that they are not ordinary people. Chapter 16, Unexpected Situation. Pei Yang looked into the depths of the woods in front of him, his facial expression changing constantly. For some reason, he always felt a little uneasy in his heart. At the same time, He Jinyan was squatting in the weeds, looking at the house not far away from him. There are guards all around the house. These people were holding various weapons and looked very fierce. He thought it must be that group of gangsters, and Fang Xiaoxiao might have been captured by them. What should I do? If I act rashly, I will definitely anger the other party, and he will threaten to release Madame Fang. Don't be careless, otherwise all your efforts will be wasted. Just as he was thinking about what to do, he suddenly heard a rustling sound of footsteps behind him. To ensure safety, he looked up at a huge banyan tree next to him, jumped up, and reached the top of the tree. He Jinyan looked down and saw the man had a shiny head, a bearded face, and was holding a 9-ring broadsword in his hand. Niu Erhu. He knew this man. He was the wanted criminal by the government in recent years. The other party committed all kinds of evil, including robbing houses, abducting women, and even slaughtering the entire family of the county magistrate. Over the years, the government has offered rewards countless times, but there has been no news about this thief. Even 3 years ago, when he was handling a case, he received news about this man from his subordinates and led the local authorities to capture him. In the end, they came up empty-handed and suffered heavy losses. This thief was so insidious that he not only set numerous traps at the place where they were being hunted, but also poisoned one of his newly married subordinates to death in the thatched cottage. After that incident, there was no news of this thief. Now, I didn't expect to meet you here. I think this thief must have a powerful background, otherwise how could he escape the pursuit of the government so easily? When He Jinyan thought about what happened that year, he became so angry that his whole body trembled. But now is not the time to act on impulse, we need to be patient and observe. He just watched Niu Erhu and his men walk towards the house in front. Fang Xiaoxiao sat on the ground, silent. No matter how Zukongnan threatened her, she ignored him. This made Zukongnan furious, but in order to present it to the Lord above, he had to suppress his anger. He stood up, glared at him coldly, and said that if anyone dared to deceive him, he would make sure that he died miserably. I think it would be better if you died first. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't care at all. She had just observed Zukongnan's face and found that he was poisoned. It would not take long for him to die from the poison. At this time, the women around were all retreating. They were like seeing the god of plague, and were even so scared that they were trembling all over. This made her speechless for a while, but at this moment, a woman suddenly let out a terrible scream. "R!" Fang Xiaoxiao turned around immediately upon hearing their voice, and saw a pretty but frail woman lying on the ground twitching in pain. White foam kept overflowing from the corners of her mouth. Poisoned. He walked quickly forward, squatted down and reached out to feel the woman's pulse. He found that the pulse was beating wildly, and it was conceivable that the poison was spreading towards her heart. Without saying a word, she took out a few silver needles from her hair and inserted them into several major acupuncture points on the woman's body. Just as she had given him 2 injections, she was grabbed by a fat woman next to her. "What are you doing? Do you want to kill someone?" There was anger in the fat woman's eyes. She was a childhood friend of the poisoned woman. The two of them originally went out for an outing, hoping to meet their ideal person. However, just when they reached the lakeside, they were attacked from behind and taken to this hell-like prison. When she saw her childhood friend being stabbed with a silver needle by a stranger in front of her, she wanted to stop it. Because she didn't want her childhood friend to survive. This place was like hell, and all she could do was to help her childhood friend escape from here ahead of time. And I will soon follow in her footsteps, hoping that we can still be sisters in the next life. The fat woman had already discovered that the woman holding the needle was unusual, and she could smell a strong smell of Chinese medicine from her body. She thought that he must be a doctor. Not only was his diagnosis skillful, but his acupuncture was also very accurate. The fat woman comes from a medical family, so she naturally makes use of the other person's abilities. The medicine I used was just rat poison. Although it can kill people, if you meet someone with certain medical skills, they only need to give the poisoned person a few injections. If you induce vomiting, you will definitely be able to save the person. But she didn't want to. She didn't want her best friend to suffer anymore, she didn't want her best friend to have nightmares every day, and she didn't want to see her in so much pain while she was powerless to do anything. Seeing that her wrist was tightly held by her, Fang Xiaoxiao tried to pull it away with force, but found that the woman's grip was extremely strong. "What are you doing? If you don't let go, she will die." I don't believe you, you must be going to kill Miao Miao. You are crazy, I have no grudge against her, why did you kill her? Then why do you want to save her? You have no relationship with her. Chen Yangyang used all her strength to tightly grasp the wrist of the woman in front of her. In another quarter of an hour, just a quarter of an hour, Miao Miao would be able to escape from this nightmare place. She looked at her best friend lying on the ground crying at the top of her lungs, tears welling up in her eyes, but she knew that as long as she could hold on, Miao Miao would not have to suffer. The women around seemed to have lost their souls long ago. They just stared blankly at everything happening, and some even laughed at the side. She thought it was very interesting that someone finally left before her. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't understand why there would be such a vicious person and say such ridiculous things. After trying a little harder and finding she couldn't break free, she called out to the women around her, asking them for help. Don't you have any compassion at all? Can't you see that people are about to die? Her voice was not loud, but it carried a sense of despair. Are people really so selfish? After hearing this, the group of women just looked at each other. Do they want to come forward and help? Actually, everyone wants to. It's just that they don't want to see each other suffer anymore. And the matter of poisoning. In fact, everyone had already discussed it. That is to ask the little mute for help. Every time the little mute brought a white flour bun, they would give it to the weakest woman among them. The little mute secretly stuffed rat poison into their white flour bun. It's a pity that rat poison is too precious and cannot be brought every time. Fang Xiaoxiao looked at the indifferent and silent crowd. She could no longer tolerate such inhumane behavior. When she said that, she felt that the woman holding her wrist was a little dazed. Taking advantage of this gap, she used a silver needle to prick the numb area with her backhand, and the woman screamed. Chapter 17. Is it wrong to save people? She quickly took out 2 silver needles from her hair and stabbed the poisoned woman as fast as she could. The women were shocked, but no one stepped forward to stop it. They are worried in their hearts, but their indifference is just to hide the kindness in their hearts. Not caring about anything is the best they can do. Now, it seems that the woman is determined to save people, so they can't say anything. Chen Yangyang, whose nerves were stabbed, lay on the ground, shouting no. But her voice was like a stone sinking into the ocean, failing to cause any splash. Fang Xiaoxiao took out the antidote pills from her bosom that she had used to prevent herself from accidentally getting poisoned when she went up the mountain to collect herbs. Fortunately, it is not the kind of herbal medicine we have now, otherwise, by the time it was ground, crushed, and squeezed into juice to be fed, people would have died no less than 100 times. When she took out the pills, the women were shocked. They had never seen such a strange thing. Giving medicine and removing the needle are done in one go. Fang Xiao sat there slumped, as if she had experienced a catastrophe, her whole body soaked in cold sweat. Few tilde, I don't know what you are thinking, but if you poison someone and kill someone, you will be caught and beheaded. Behead? It's so ridiculous. Chen Yangyang was still lying on the ground. Although the silver needle on her arm had been taken away by Fang Xiaoxiao, she didn't want to worry about it anymore. Although Miao Miao was rescued, what awaited them next was something more terrifying than death. Is this God's will? Instead of getting angry, she laughed. Her laughter sounded hearty, but it made people feel very distressed. Fang Xiaoxiao didn't know why. She had clearly saved the person, but the other person seemed to be in so much pain. She wanted to ask the reason, but was shocked by the fat woman's next words. Chen Yangyang started crying while laughing, and then she said coldly while crying. You are a bodhisattva. You have great powers and can bring the dead back to life. But why do you appear in front of us? Why should we see the hope of survival? Why should we decide the life and death of others? Fang Xiaoxiao was completely confused after hearing this. She wondered if this person had some mental illness. She saved people with good intentions, but why does it feel like it's her fault? Just as she was wondering, she heard footsteps coming from the darkness deep in the corridor. Judging from the sound, there are quite a few people coming. Under the dim light of the oil lamp, 3 ugly men wearing coarse linen clothes walked over. When they appeared in front of everyone, a man with a mustache smiled at the person next to him. The other party grinned, took out a bunch of keys from his arms, and opened the iron door of the cell. With the creaking sound of the iron gate, the 3 men had moved in front of the crowd. The man holding the key looked at them with a silly smile. Who should I trust today? The man with the mustache pointed casually and said. Of course it's her. She has a sweet voice and a plump body, which is enough for our brother Sainer to ravage." The other two burst into laughter, saying that the eldest brother had great taste. The two also claimed that if Zukongnan had not controlled them and required that no more than 3 people should go there every day, they would have already dragged a group of women there. Fang Xiaoxiao wanted to step forward to stop it, but Chen Yangyang shook her head to stop her. Her eyes were full of emptiness, like a soulless zombie, and she stood up obediently. The 3 men laughed even more unscrupulously, and kept exaggerating that the other party was too obedient. When Chen Yangyang followed several people out of the cell, the door was closed again. At the same time, the 3 men had taken Chen Yangyang away from the cell. Fang Xiaoxiao watched everything that was happening in front of her, and she knew very well what the other party would suffer next. It turned out that Chen Yangyang stopped him from saving the poisoned woman with another intention. Indeed, it would be better to die than to live like this. As time passed, she learned everything about it from the women around her. Those traffickers not only want to sell people, but also take them out from time to time. Hearing these words, she felt uncomfortable. You know, if it was her world, how could such an inhumane thing happen? But this was an ancient feudal dynasty, and bandits were rampant. Am I just going to sit there and wait for death? She is a woman of the 21st century. How could she accept such a fate? No, I have to rescue everyone. When Fang Xiaoxiao thought of this, she began to plan what to do next. He Jinyan should have also discovered that he was missing. So, how can we spread the news here? She first looked around and found that the only ventilation opening was the square hole on the top of the wall opposite the cell. If I had my signal bamboo tube with me, I might be able to aim it at the hole and try to transmit the signal out. But the signal bamboo tube is not with me now. I think it was when I was caught that I fell into the bushes. What should I do? Just then, footsteps were heard again from deep in the corridor. The footsteps sounded very light. Void south. Fang Xiaoxiao's first reaction was this person's arrival. When the figure gradually emerged, she could see clearly who it was. It was the little mute. The little mute still held 5 yellowed steamed buns in his hands. But his eyes and cheeks were swollen, and it seemed that he had been beaten. The little mute had a smile on his face, as if he didn't feel any pain. He first came to the iron bars and glanced into the cell. When he saw the woman lying on the ground in a daze, a hint of surprise appeared in his eyes, and then he looked at everyone. The little mute squatted down and placed the steamed buns on the ground one by one through the iron fence in front of him. The group of women did not fight for things like before, but instead sat there. The little mute pointed at everyone and made it ee sound. A woman shook her head. He nodded twice again. Then he took out a white steamed bun covered with dust and footprints from his arms. The little mute pointed at the steamed bun and made an ee sound again, as if to say that there was something wrong with the steamed bun. Fang Xiaoxiao already knew that the steamed buns contained rat poison. She walked up to the little mute and spoke through the iron fence. Manchu is fine, but the person was rescued by me. Oh! Although I don't understand what you are saying, I hope you can do something for me, okay? Aha! The little mute nodded desperately, as if he understood what she meant. Fang Xiaoxiao took the hairpin from her head and handed it to him. Can you help me take this hairpin and find a man near the mine? He is about 8 feet tall, wearing green clothes, and has a beauty mole between his eyebrows. The little mute nodded again. Fang Xiao looked around and found that no one was coming from the corridor. She then took off her cloth shoes and took out a few copper coins. I'm sorry, my purse fell off. This is all I have left, but don't worry. Chapter 18, Encountering a Little Mute. When we find that person, I'll ask him to give you some more silver. The little mute waved his hand to refuse. Fang Xiaoxiao stuffed the money directly into the little mute's arms, and also specifically told him to be careful not to be discovered. She watched the little mute gradually leave, and she felt inexplicably worried, wondering whether the other party could find someone. However, I guess this is just a gamble. I hope He Jinyan can find his lost signal bamboo tube on the road and also meet the little mute. The little mute held the hairpin in his hand and carefully put it into his arms, fearing that it would be discovered. He was very small, only 5.5 feet tall, not much different in height from a 5-year-old child, or even slightly shorter. He was an orphan who grew up eating at other people's homes and was looked down upon by everyone since he was a child. But he didn't care. As long as he could survive, he wouldn't mind even if he had to compete with dogs for food. Once, when he was doing farm work for an employer in the village, the employer's son saw that he was quiet and asked someone to pin him to the ground. The other person muttered to himself, saying that since he didn't like to talk, what was the point of using the tongue? The child was not much older than him, both were about 10 years old. But because he didn't like to talk, the other party cut off his tongue with scissors. Because of this, he could no longer utter a word. When he was unconscious, he felt a sharp pain at the tip of his nose. But when he opened his eyes, he was almost scared to death. A wild dog was gnawing at the wing of his nose. He tried to fight it, but he was no match for the wild dog. Fortunately, at this time, a man with a long sword appeared. The man not only helped him kill the wild dog, but also slaughtered everyone in the owner's family after learning about his experience. From then on, he followed the man up the mountain. It's just a pity that the man eventually died at the hands of Zukongnan. The little mute recalled everything, tears in his eyes. He lowered his head to wipe away his tears. Wu Zi, what's wrong with you? Who bullied you again? Tell Uncle Erhu. Uncle Erhu will skin you alive and take out your tendons to let you vent your anger. Neo Erhu patted the little mute's shoulder with his big hand, looking around with a doting smile on his face. The group of younger brothers who followed him started looking around. This little mute is the adopted son of their boss. If anyone dares to bully him, he is going against the people of Longhu village. Seeing that Wu Zi didn't say anything and just lowered his head, Neo Erhu reached out and lifted his face. It would have been better if he hadn't looked at it. Once he looked at it, he was so angry that he flew into a rage. Damn it, these bastards dared to bully Wu Zi again while I was out patrolling with my men. As he was angry, he raised the 9-ring broadsword in his hand and shouted at the younger brother beside him. Let's go and avenge Wu Zi. What a bunch of bastards, relying on the protection of Zukongnan, they are lawless, right? When the little mute saw that he was trying to stand up for himself, he quickly grabbed Uncle Erhu and desperately wanted his head back. Aha! Wu Zi, don't be afraid. I, your Uncle Tiger, know my limits and nothing will happen. Neo Erhu asked someone to pull the little mute away and headed towards the kitchen with a few people. He knew it must be that group of guys again, who would take advantage of the fact that he was not bullying Wu Zi every time. Last time, he secretly put laxatives in Wu Zi's food. Zukongnan asked him to show his ID, and he had no choice but to swallow his anger. The next few times were just minor fights, and he had no way to deal with those guys. He was so angry that when he saw Wu Zi's face was covered with bruises, he could no longer bear it. When the eldest brother died, he repeatedly told himself not to let the fifth son be bullied. Now what? Not only did he fail to fulfill his promise, but he also caused the 5 children to suffer a lot. The little mute wanted to stop them, but was held back by Neo Erhu's men. He could only make a few hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo sounds, his eyes full of worry. Unfortunately, it's too late. The man who stopped him smiled and consoled him. Don't be afraid. Brother Erhu will be fine. Look at you. You were bullied and didn't tell us. Do you think we are your uncles? If you do this again next time, I won't buy you any candid whores. The little mute scratched his head with a look of guilt and apology. That's enough, you're always like this. Go play first, and when your Uncle Erhu comes back, we'll go down the mountain. I will carry the candid whores up the mountain for you, so you can eat candid whores every day. The man smiled and drove the little mute away. Because his hands were itching, he hadn't had a fight in a long time, and he wanted to have a good fight this time. The little mute stood there, wanting to say something. But in the end he didn't say it, just turned around and went to the corner in front of the yard. He Jinyan looked around for a long time but found that he had not found a suitable place to sneak into. He stood on the treetop and looked at what was happening in the yard in front of him. A child was found heading towards a corner of the courtyard wall. Is there a hole there? Then he leaped down from the treetop, taking 2 steps at a time and shuttling between the trees. Soon we arrived at the location we had just discovered. The back here is just close to the cliff wall, and there is a cliff behind it. The courtyard wall is a mountain. It's strange, why didn't I notice this just now? He Jinyan crawled in the dense grass to avoid being discovered by the patrolmen. At this time, a pile of grass under the courtyard wall was pushed aside and a half-grown child came out. The other party first looked around, then quickly blocked the entrance of the cave with a pile of grass. Then the child crawled in the grass. In order not to alert the enemy, he Jinyan quickly retreated backwards. It just happened that I could observe the child without being noticed by him. As the two of them moved forward and backward, they soon arrived at the woods. The child then stood up, brushed off the weeds on his body, and went deep into the woods. He Jinyan seized the opportunity and rushed to the child in one step. Then, without waiting for the child to react, he reached out and covered his mouth and nose. When he covered the child's mouth, he felt something unusual. No nose. This discovery surprised him greatly. The little mute was startled by the sudden big hand, but when he raised his eyes and saw the person clearly, he stopped shouting. Instead, he nodded vigorously and made umming sounds with his mouth. He Jinyan didn't dare to delay any longer and took the person away from here first. When the two of them came behind a big rock, he loosened his hand and signaled the boy not to shout. The little mute nodded obediently and was about to reach out to take the hairpin in his arms. He Jinyan said vigilantly, "What do you want to do?" "Mum." The little mute poked his chest with his hand. He knew very well that the other party was on guard against him. He Jinyan was half believing and half doubting. He looked at the other person closely and found nothing unusual. Then he quickly reached out and touched the boy's arms. Chapter 19, Meeting the enemy again. When he touched a cylindrical object, he took it out and took a look. Hairpin. Mrs. Fang S. He was very familiar with this hairpin. It was the one Fang Xiaoxiao usually wore. The hairpin has a very simple appearance and does not have any special features at all, but the key point is that it is carved out of wood. At the beginning, he even teased the other party, asking why he didn't buy a piece of silver jewelry. But he angrily retorted and told him to buy one if he had the guts. He Jinyan thought about this for a long time, wondering how he could give the silver hairpin to Fang Xiaoxiao without making her doubt his identity. At this time, the little mute saw the other person holding the hairpin in a daze, and he hummed again. He Jinyan then realized that maybe Madame Fang asked him to come out to find her. Think about it. He did not linger any longer and took the little mute towards the courtyard wall under the cliff. When the two arrived at this place, the little mute opened the haystack and motioned for them to get in. He Jinyan frowned, thinking that as the Governor-General, he could not do such a shameful thing. Next side. He and the little mute came to the yard. When he came in, he found the place so empty, completely different from what he saw on the treetops. What's going on? He looked at the little mute beside him. The other party spread his hands and indicated that he didn't know. At this moment, a scream attracted the two of them. He Jinyan hasn't figured out the situation yet. The little mute had already walked quickly towards the place where the sound came from. Hey, don't run. When He Jinyan saw him leaving, he had no choice but to follow him. The two men ran across the front yard and headed towards the backyard. Backyard. Zukongnan was sitting on the armchair in the courtyard, holding a cup of tea in his hand. In front of him were 7 men kneeling, each with scars on his face. The leader was Niu Erhu. Fuck you, you hermaphrodite, you bastard. If you have the guts, just fight me in single combat. What's the point of drugging me? Zukongnan blew on the tea in his hand and took a sip slowly. I told you not to let me see you committing a crime again. Why are you listening? Are your ears useless? As he spoke, he pulled out a small knife from his sleeve and threw it towards the person in front of him. Niu Erhu was tied up tightly with ropes and couldn't escape at all. Arr! He screamed in pain and felt a sharp pain in his right ear. The little mute happened to see this scene, and he was so scared that he ran towards Niu Erhu quickly. Niu Erhu and his men turned around and shouted. Fool, why are you running back here? Go away and leave us alone. Zukongnan sneered. Where are you running to? You little bastard, do you really think I don't know what you did? Tilder. 2 small knives flew out from his sleeves again and headed straight for the little mute's knees. Bang! Bang! He Jinyan drew out the soft sword from his waist and chopped at the knife that was flying towards the little mute. He grabbed the little mute's clothes with his right hand and pulled him behind him, while he used his soft sword to block the knife. It's really cruel. Even children are spared. There was a hint of viciousness in Zukongnan's eyes, and a smile on the corner of his mouth. Long time no see, Sir Taisai. He Jinyan swung the soft sword in his hand, making a crisp and pleasant sound. I should have thought it would be you. Otherwise it really doesn't make sense. Who else could be so capable as to escape from the hands of the government so easily? And my newly married subordinate died tragically in the thatched cottage. It was all caused by you. Zukongnan covered his mouth with his hands and chuckled, then signaled with his eyes to his men beside him to add hot water. The guy seemed to have lost his soul and didn't react for a long time. Whoosh! When he came to his senses, he felt a warm current coming from his neck, and then he fell headfirst onto the small square table in front of him. On the square table, scarlet liquid was flowing slowly. Everyone present was shocked. They all felt that it was themselves who had their necks wiped, and each of them couldn't help but touch his or her neck with his or her hand. Niu burst into laughter when he saw this. He didn't care at all about the severe pain in his ear. Hermaphrodites, they kill even their own men at will. I really don't know why these idiots still want to work for you wholeheartedly. Hey, are you guys so cheap? You let them kill you at will, and you don't even dare to resist. Zukongnan sneered. Stop howling, they can't be as stupid as you and think of resisting me. As he spoke, he lifted up the head of the man whose neck had just been wiped, and used the teacup to catch the liquid flowing from the man's neck, muttering to himself not to waste it. This action made Niu and the others feel sick. They thought that they had done all kinds of evil over the years, including murder and arson, which was a heinous enough thing, but compared with the other side, they were still too weak. The soft sword in He Jinyan's hand was already making a crackling sound from being squeezed by him. He stopped watching the show and took the lead to leap forward, heading towards the southern neck of the void accompanied by a whistling wind. Dang! What? Black gold soft armor. Zukongnan stretched out his arm to block the opponent's attack. He still had a smile on his face, but a shiny black object was revealed on the arm that was attacked. It looks like the armor is sewn onto the skin, or it looks like it is native to the flesh. Seeing this, He Jinyan took advantage of the opponent's push and quickly jumped backwards. He looked at what was exposed on Zukongnan's arm, and his expression became extremely ugly. I didn't expect that the legendary black gold soft armor was impervious to gunfire and contained a highly poisonous substance. This thing is actually real, and it is growing on the other person's body. Zukongnan was still sitting on the armchair, waving to his subordinates beside him. The group of people shouted and started to chop at He Jinyan with their knives. At the same time, Niu, who was kneeling on the ground, roared. Help us untie them quickly. Let's unite and fight this monster together. He Jinyan did not hesitate. Although he knew that Niu was a wanted criminal, now was not the time to worry about it. Instead, he should think about how to defeat Zukongnan. He was already on their way here and had left many signals along their way. As long as his men saw them, they would arrive as soon as possible. After Niu was untied, he shouted loudly and ran towards the person who was coming towards him, picking up the 9-ring broadsword on the ground. You bastard, I'm going to kill you. Puff. The man in front of him had his head and neck separated, and blood was gushing out like a fountain, splashing all over his face. Niu wiped the blood off his cheek, and then chopped at the person who was blocking his way as if he was chopping melons and vegetables. His idea was simple, which was to take advantage of the chaos to launch a surprise attack on Zukongnan. Who cares if it's black gold or soft armor? In front of his sword, everything is nothing. Give me your life, you hermaphrodite. I will send you to hell today. Go and apologize to my elder brother. Just you Tilder. Zukongnan sneered, slapped the armrest with his hand, leaped into the air, and easily snatched the opponent's sword that was slashing towards him. Crack! The armchair was like paper and was easily chopped into pieces by Niu. Niu roared again, like a wild bull, and the sound was like thunder. But Zukongnan did not move at all and stood alone within 10 steps of him. Why? That's all you can do. Just now you complained that I used drugs to catch you, but now I'm using my bare hands. You are not even 1/3 as good as your eldest brother. You have to know that I poisoned him and only managed to defeat him. Raw. Only then did Niu understand why his elder brother fell so easily and was killed by Zukongnan with one sword. It turns out that all this was caused by the other party's poisoning. What a despicable villain. Chapter 20, Black Gold Poison Armor. Zukongnan touched his arm, where he was wounded by the sword. He hadn't experienced the joy of killing for a long time, and the murderous intent in his heart gradually grew stronger. Okay, I haven't tasted this blood for a long time. Come, let me experience this long-lost feeling. His eyes were suddenly filled with red bloodshot, and the smile on his lips was chilling. He was originally wearing a white gown, but it was torn into pieces, revealing his muscular upper body. You can see that the tendon meat is covered with a layer of black metallic armor. If others saw it, they would just think it was a bunch of black lumps and would feel very nauseous. This was also the first time that Niu Erhu saw him, and he couldn't help feeling a little nervous. This is the legendary black gold poison armor that turns poison into armor. He had heard of this thing from his eldest brother. It is said that the refining process of the black gold poison armor is extremely demanding. Anyone who wears it must be a eunuch and must stay in a room full of poisonous insects, snakes, and rats for 49 days. They had to fight with it continuously, endure extraordinary pain, and at the same time, they had to use their internal energy to neutralize the poison. In short, it is not something that humans can endure, nor is it something that ordinary people can achieve. Niu Erhu's body was tense and he held the 9-ring long sword tightly in his hand. He didn't dare to slack off for a moment. His eyes were as big as copper bells, staring at the monster in front of him. In his eyes, Zukongnan is no longer an ordinary person, but like a hellhound, which makes people feel terrified. He never imagined that this guy was so perverted and unspeakable that he actually cultivated a poison helmet. What a monster, but even so, I want to avenge my elder brother and my dead brothers. Niu Erhu roared with a long knife in his hand. Immediately following, he rushed towards the other party at a rapid pace. After all, although the poison helmet was said to be extremely powerful, it was invincible. But what can I do? I can only attack his lower body and cut him in half. After all, no one can develop a poisonous armor on the lower half of the body. But all this did not go as he wished. Zukongnan looked in front of him and saw the person who wanted to attack his lower body. He stood there calmly. What? Do you really think that I only have armor on my upper body? Niu Erhu slashed the opponent's thigh with his sword. I could hear the crisp clinking sound of iron colliding. At the same time, he felt a tingling sensation in his arms. What? You actually refined your lower body as well. He looked incredulous and began to tremble all over. If it had been just now, the opponent would have been either dead or crippled by this blow. Apart from anything else, he has always been confident in his strength and speed. Even his eldest brother when he was alive would give him 3 points. Zukongnan sneered. Niu Erhu, you are so naive. With your speed as slow as an old dog, do you really think you can touch me? Har har. He stretched out his pale, slender right hand and gently grasped the back of the 9-ring broadsword. Niu Erhu tried to break free, using all his strength, but found that he didn't move at all. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. He knew very well that it would take a very horrible and cruel person to be able to refine it to the point where his lower body was covered with poison armor. But that only exists in legends, and no one in the world can do it. Zukongnan still maintains its original appearance. He raised his left hand, turned his palm into a fist, and hit him in the face. Brother Erhu, be careful. Fang Xiao sat cross-legged on the stone ground covered with dead grass. She looked at the square stone cave which was gradually getting darker. Why did the little mute take so long? Did he encounter some accident? The more I thought about it, the more possible it seemed. After calculating the time, I realized that the little mute had been gone for about 2 hours, which is almost 4 hours. If he really encounters any danger, then I would be indirectly harming him. We can no longer sit and wait for death, we must find a solution. She walked slowly to the cell door in front of her and began to fumble with the lock with her hands. Hey! This lock! Snap! Following a crisp sound. The rectangular copper lock in her hand suddenly loosened. Not locked. Fang Xiao recalled the scene when Chen Yangyang was taken away by the 3 gangsters. By the way, the other party seemed to dislike the trouble of locking the car. Yes, that's right. She quickly turned around and spoke to the people behind her. This door is not locked, let's escape quickly. As soon as these words came out, she originally thought that everyone would agree with her. Who would have thought that group of people would hug each other tremblingly? No one dared to step forward, and some even grumbled not to leave. This. You can escape, why are you all so scared? Fang Xiaoxiao really couldn't understand. Could it be that they had all been educated? These people have already lost their self-awareness. When she was about to question everyone, the thin woman in yellow, who was lying on the ground in a daze, slowly spoke. The woman in yellow covered her chest with her hands, her expression looking extremely painful. She had truly been through a near-death experience and now was extremely weak, even speaking seemed to be a struggle for her. Well, benefactor, please don't go out, otherwise the consequences will be disastrous. She knew that if those beasts discovered her escape, she would suffer horribly. You know, last time a sister escaped when the iron gate was not locked. But in the end he was caught by the group of evil people and brutally killed in front of them. That bloody scene is still particularly engraved in my mind. That group of people cannot even be described as human beings. Instead, they are a group of evil spirits that came from the underworld. Qin Miao Miao was well aware of the seriousness of the matter, so she wanted to die. The same is true for her sisters. Each of them has long lost the motivation to live. Among them were ladies from merchant families, some were born into poor peasant families, and some were daughters of officials. Everyone brought here has a different fate. Originally, there were more than 30 people imprisoned here, but in the end there were only 7 of them left, and now there are only 6 left. Her best friend Chen Yangyang must be dead. When Qin Miao Miao thought of this, tears welled up in her eyes. After hearing this, Fang Xiaoxiao frowned. But if I continue like this, the final outcome will be more miserable than death. She was not someone who could accept such a tragic fate. Besides, as a time traveler, how could she accept her fate? Then I'll go out first. If I can escape, I'll bring people to rescue you. As she spoke, she opened the iron gate and ran quickly into the depths of the corridor. Squeak! Accompanied by the dull sound of the old wooden door. It turned out that the prison was built in a valley, and in front of it was a room. There was naturally a secret door behind her. After a lot of searching, she finally found the switch, which turned out to be a copper peacock oil lamp. I really have to admire the wisdom of the ancients. I have only seen such secret compartments on TV before. Chapter 21, The Secret. At that time, I was still wondering how it was possible to do this. Now it seems that I really have little knowledge. At this moment, she heard the sound of fighting coming from outside the wooden door in front of her. What's going on? Could it be that the little mute has already found He Jinyan and asked him to bring reinforcements? Thinking of this, Fang Xiaoxiao walked quickly towards the wooden door. But the next second, she was stunned. She looked out through the hole in the wooden door. What he saw was not He Jinyan's reinforcements, but the broken body of Niu Erhu lying in a pool of blood. At this time, the only sound left from Niu Erhu's breathing was a faint gasp. His lower body had been separated from his upper body, and his waist and abdomen were in an even more miserable state. His intestines were scattered all over the ground, wrapped in scarlet blood. Seeing this scene, Fang Xiaoxiao hurriedly covered her mouth and nose, trying hard to suppress the urge to vomit. So scary. What on earth is happening outside? Why was Zukongnen's upper body wrapped in black iron blocks, and how did the bald guy start fighting with the other party? Could there be an internal conflict? Thinking of this, she quickly squatted down, fearing that she would be discovered by people outside. He Jinyan was fighting with the person in front of him. He never expected that this group of people were so powerful that even he, a professor, could only barely deal with them. What's more, there is also Zukongnen. This guy has become as hard as iron, and his body is poisonous, making it impossible for anyone to get close to him. What should I do? How come his subordinates haven't discovered this place for so long? Zukongnen looked at Niu Erhu lying on the ground and sneered. What? You still want to fight with me? Don't even mention you. Even if it's your elder brother Shang Shanlong, that's fine. If he hadn't begged me to take you in, I would have wiped you all out long ago, and I wouldn't have kept you alive until today. He had a frivolous look in his eyes and looked at the person on the ground with disdain. Niu Erhu suddenly realized. It seems that the eldest brother already knew the opponent's strength, but he had to be killed by him just to protect us. I guess I underestimated the enemy. So what if I feel regretful and unwilling? The ending was already determined. It would be great if he could be more patient, maybe he wouldn't have harmed a group of good brothers. It's a pity that everything has become a thing of the past. It was no use for him to be upset. Zukongnen raised his foot and stepped towards his head. The fast must eventually end. The next thing he had to do was to deal with the person in front of him who was still fighting with his men, He Jinyan, the governor of the judicial department of the Dayu dynasty. This person has been against you in every way. Now is the chance to kill him as well as Fang Wei Miao. He raised his hand and pointed to He Jinyan's position. Everyone disperse, so that I can meet you. Humph, monster. He Jinyan slashed at the person in front of him with a sword. The man who was beheaded covered his throat, his eyes were full of blood, and he felt the warm liquid flowing out of his throat with his hands. His pupils gradually dilated until his entire body collapsed like a giant tower. He Jinyan took a quick step and rushed towards the person in front of him. What he had to do now was to fight Shukong Nanyu as much as possible, try to delay more time, and wait for the arrival of reinforcements from his subordinates. Long Jinyang pulled Murong Changqing, who was humming all the way. Murong Changqing felt like his body was drained, although this amount of exercise was nothing to him. But in order not to expose his own strength, he did not use his true energy and allowed Long Jinyang to drag him. But it was okay for a short time. As time went on, he himself couldn't stand it anymore. This is not. He felt his body go weak and he felt powerless all over, and he even wanted to give up. Logically speaking, if anything happens to Fang Xiaoxiao, He Jinyan is still here. What does it have to do with him, a weak scholar? Why do I have to lie down like this? Now. He didn't even know whether the two were in the abandoned mine. What if it's all just speculation? Then it would be a waste of time. An inexplicable worry arose in Long Jinyan's heart. He always felt that Madame Fang must have encountered some danger. This is a conditioned reflex he developed as a general after years of fighting on the battlefield or being assassinated. The two of them ran towards the grove in front of them, one in front and one behind. Just when Murong Changqing was about to give up, a brand new house suddenly appeared before my eyes. It's strange, how could there be such a new and clean house in this remote place? He quickly pulled Long Jinyang. Wait. Only then did Long Jinyang stop, turned around and asked in confusion. Why? Don't you find it strange? From what I know, the mine was abandoned 10 years ago, and since the road is steep, it is impossible for anyone to live here. So you're saying? That's right, there must be something fishy going on. Murong Changqing told him his analysis. After hearing this, Long Jinyang began to think. If he just barged in like this, he might be ambushed. Still be careful and subtle. In addition, it is not certain at the moment whether Madame Fang is among them. He nodded and agreed to what he proposed. That is, he first jumped to the top of the towering tree in front of him, and carefully observed from the height to see if there was really an ambush inside the courtyard wall. Whoosh! Long Jinyang rose from the ground and leaped to the top of the tree. He stared at the courtyard. But they found that there was no one patrolling. This makes us even more suspicious. He always felt that Fang Xiaoxiao should be locked up in it. However, Murong Changqing, who was sitting under a tree to enjoy the cool air, had already started shouting at the top of his lungs. How is it? What's the situation inside? Long Jinyang jumped down, stood in front of it, and shook his head to indicate that he didn't see anyone. Murong Changqing was shocked at first when he heard this, but he immediately understood what was going on. Maybe someone really lived here. Otherwise, how can you see the neatness and cleanliness after long-term care? Who would go and build such a large compound in the mountains for no reason? Looking at the house type, he could guess that this should be a large courtyard with 3 entrances and 3 exits. Have you seen the backyard? Long Jinyang was confused by what he asked. He had just checked carefully but did not find any other courtyards. He also knew that this was not in line with common thinking. With such a big place, how could the backyard be forgotten? No, but I think it's a little weird. Oh? You've discovered the problem too. Murong Changqing gently patted the dust behind him. It seems that this big fool is not completely brainless and can learn to think. Long Jinyang told him his guess. Murong Changqing nodded, indicating that he thought so too. Since there is no one in the yard, they can look for it along the wall. After hearing this, Long Jinyang did not linger any longer. He dodged and ran towards the yard in front, then looked up at the high courtyard wall in front of him and jumped onto the wall. The yard is divided by big trees. He was currently standing in the middle of the courtyard, and after a closer look he discovered that there was an extension of the wall tiles beneath his feet. Follow the extended position and walk forward carefully. But after taking 2 steps, he heard the sound of swords clashing in a fight. Really? There is something fishy going on here. Long Jinyang no longer hesitated. Chapter 22 Rescue. Long Jinyang leaned over and looked towards the backyard. I saw more than a dozen people lying in a pool of blood below. There was also a white-faced man with black scales all over his upper body. The other party was wrestling with He Jinyan. What he didn't expect was that He Jinyan was quite strong in martial arts. However, the white-faced man's martial arts were more powerful, and he beat the opponent back step by step. This is black gold GU armor. That's right, he had encountered this kind of person wearing black scale armor on the battlefield before. That was 3 years ago, when I was fighting against a fierce foreign general at the border, and this was the thing on his body. But what was unexpected was that this thing had actually flowed into the territory of Dayu dynasty. Judging from the other party's clothing and appearance, he is undoubtedly a Han Chinese, so why would he be able to practice this kind of evil witchcraft? Long Jinyang did not jump down to rescue He Jinyan, but turned around and looked at the person in the corner. Murong Chanqing raised his head and looked upwards, and happened to meet his eyes. What's going on? I heard a fight coming from inside. Sure. Long Jinyang jumped lightly and jumped down from the wall. He walked quickly up to him and whispered. There is an internal conflict inside, and there is also a person wearing a black gold poisonous armor. You should quickly go down the mountain and report to the authorities. A hint of shock flashed across Murong Chanqing's eyes, and then he asked. What's the meaning? Long Jinyang quickly recounted what he had seen. Okay, I understand. Then why don't you go down the mountain? Murong Chanqing looked unhappy. Wouldn't it be better for the bandits to kill each other? They can just sit back and reap the benefits. Why would they have to run so far down the mountain? But he hasn't expressed his opinion yet. Long Jinyang had jumped onto the wall again, and after saying that he was going to help He Jinyan, he disappeared. Murong Chanqing then realized that He Jinyan was inside the courtyard wall, and Madame Fang must have been captured by the group of thieves as well. He wanted to help He Jinyan like Long Jinyang, but on second thought, there was no need to expose himself now. Then he began to try to look around, trying to find out if there was a secret passage that could lead to the yard. In my opinion, many of these courtyards have a secret passage. Murong Chanqing began to look around and had already forgotten Long Jinyan's instructions. As soon as he turned right, he saw a pile of weeds in the corner of the courtyard wall in front of him. The weeds looked very messy and seemed to have been frequently turned over by someone. Some images suddenly appear in the mind. Generally speaking, this is likely to be done intentionally by someone, and there must be something hidden behind it. He took 2 or 3 steps to the corner and reached out to pull up the weeds in front of him. Really? This is deliberately used for camouflage. After removing the pile of weeds, a hole the size of a child suddenly appeared in front of him. The entrance of the cave seemed to have been deliberately carved out by someone, and the irregular artificial traces were very obvious. Murong Chanqing revealed a smug smile. Although the entrance to the cave was only about the size of his head, it was not a problem for him at all. No matter what, I can shrink my muscles and cartilage. Not to mention a hole as big as a head, even if it's a little smaller, I can still deal with it. He first tied the corner of his gown around his waist, and then began to twist his body and limbs, making a crackling sound. His body seemed to be without any bones. He crawled limply on the ground, like a water snake twisting its waist as it crawled towards the cave entrance. When Murong Chanqing passed through the small hole, he first looked out at the weeds in front of him, and when he found that there was no one there, he restored his whole body to normal. I pulled aside the bushes in front of me and looked into the yard, and heard the sounds of fighting. Long Jinyang was wrestling with a white-faced man, and He Jinyan was lying on the ground. At this time, there were several bloody holes on He Jinyan's body, and black liquid was oozing out of the holes. It seemed that he was poisoned. He knew the thing called black gold GU armor that Long Jinyang had mentioned just now. This thing is extremely evil, I've heard my father mention it before. It is said that the person who can cultivate this skill will be locked in a jar with the most poisonous animals in the world and will be constantly tempered until only the person is left in the jar. But even his father didn't know how to practice it specifically. Forget it, I'd better not expose myself so easily. I'll look around first to see if I can find Madame Fang. As for Long Jinyang, he was more relieved. After all, the other party's skills were very impressive and not something ordinary people could match. Although I am very curious about the other party's identity, now is not the time to think about it. After Murong Chanqing made up his mind, he began to crawl along the grass on the right. He looked at the dilapidated tile house not far in front of him and thought about going in there first. When he arrived at the door, he tried pushing it with his hand, but found that it didn't move at all. When I looked up, I saw that it was locked. I looked around and saw that no one was taking care of this place. Then she stood up and carefully took out a silver hairpin from her bun. The hairpin looks very delicate, with a white crane carved on the head, which looks lifelike. The eyes of the white crane are decorated with red gems. However, this appearance is not self-confident and difficult to be easily noticed. Murong Changqing held the hairpin in one hand and held the long lock in the other. With his superb lock-picking skills, the long lock was easily opened like a door bolt. He quickly put the hairpin back on his head and pushed the wooden door hard. Huh? Why can't it be opened yet? When I pushed the wooden door hard again, I found that there seemed to be something inside the door. Inside the door. Fang Xiaoxiao felt someone pushing the door hard. She was very surprised and thought that she had to hold on tight no matter what. But Murong Changqing outside the house saw that he couldn't open it even if he pushed hard. He seemed very dissatisfied that such a small wooden door dared to block him. He took a deep breath and kicked with all his might. Bang! The wooden door was kicked open by him like a kite with a broken string. Fang Xiaoxiao screamed in surprise and fell to the ground with such force. Madam Fang! When Murong Changqing saw the person lying on the ground, he immediately stepped forward and helped him up. Fang Xiaoxiao raised her eyes when she heard the voice, and then she saw clearly who had kicked the door. Murong Changqing! How could you? Before she could finish the rest of her words, she saw someone rushing towards her from behind. The opponent raised a long knife and was about to chop at him. Careful! She had just spoken. Murong Changqing's figure flashed and he took her to the side. The big man chopped the stone slab with the long knife in his hand. After the big man reacted, he wanted to raise his knife to chop at the two men again. At this critical moment, Murong Changqing shook his wrist and a sharp dagger appeared in his palm. He then swung it towards the big man, and the knife flew out of the air. Whoosh! Chapter 23 General Dragon. When the knife was stuck in the wooden pillar. At the same time, a blood mark appeared on the big man's neck. He sneered. You are just playing a little trick, and you think you can hurt me in the slightest. How ridiculous. Who are you? Before he could finish his words, he felt difficulty breathing and his body became weak and limp involuntarily. His pupils instantly became bloodshot, his eyes began to blur, and then he staggered and fell heavily to the ground. Bang! A muffled sound. The big man never knew why until he died. Murong Changqing sneered, without looking at the other person again, but squatted down and asked the person in his arms. Are you okay? My husband came late and frightened me. How come he is so powerful? Isn't he just a pale-faced scholar who talks a lot of nonsense? For a moment, Fang Xiaoxiao recalled the time when she first met the other person. The guy who only knew how to eat all day and even complained about being tired of washing dishes. Murong Changqing is good for nothing except eating and sleeping. Why did I suddenly become so awesome? Was I dreaming? She was somewhat unbelieving, so she quickly reached out and pinched her thigh hard. My lady, what are you doing? Why are you pinching my thigh? Does it hurt? Pain? Then I'm not dreaming. Fang Xiaoxiao then stood up and clapped her hands to express her opinion. Murong Changqing didn't understand the other party's intentions. However, he hasn't spoken yet. He then grabbed his arm and told him to go and save someone. He didn't have time to think too much and followed him, walking quickly forward. Fang Xiaoxiao glanced at the oil lamp next to the wall in front of her. She tried to wiggle. Really? This oil lamp is the secret door mechanism. After hearing 2 clicks, the wall in front began to rotate, revealing a space the size of one person square. Fang Xiaoxiao waved her arm, signaling the people behind her to follow. The two of them walked into the secret passage one after the other. Now. He Jinyan lay on the ground in the yard, his whole body gradually becoming numb. Just when he was confronting Zukongnan, he was ambushed by the other party and stabbed several times. Their knife was smeared with poison, but fortunately he was cautious and quickly sealed the acupuncture points on his body, thus he managed to save his life. However, the poison was now rapidly spreading throughout his body. Without the antidote, he estimated that he would not be able to survive more than half an hour. Right now, we can only pray that Long Jinyang can defeat the enemy quickly. I was too careless about what happened just now. I never thought that Shukongnan was so vicious and cruel, and his methods were extremely brutal. If I had known this earlier, I should have waited until my subordinates gathered before fighting them. Fortunately, Long Jinyang appeared. Although I don't know the other party's identity. But his years of professional experience told him that Long Jinyang was not an ordinary person. Long Jinyang was holding a spear and fighting with the man in front of him. It's been a long time since I had such a painful battle. Although the opponent was wearing black armor, it was extremely difficult to break through his defense in a short period of time. But that's what makes this battle meaningful. He held the gun in one hand with a smile on his face. You are quite capable, you can actually fight with me. Zukongnan wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and spat on the ground. Par. Who are you and why are you so skilled in martial arts? It doesn't matter who I am. You just need to know that you will die by my gun today, and it will be worth your life in this world. What an arrogant person. Snort. Long Jinyang sneered, if the spear in his hand was not his own snow-silver dragon. This person's intestines had already been ruptured and he fell to the ground and died. It's a pity that his spear is now nowhere to be found and is probably lost in the sea. He sighed slightly, held the gun with both hands again, and stabbed at the other party quickly. After a few rounds, Zukongnan felt that his strength was gradually fading away, and he was almost unable to withstand the opponent's attack. Fortunately, he was wearing a black gold armor, so he was not injured in the vital parts. But it could not withstand the opponent's fierce attack. That's really strange. Not only did this person not lose much strength, but he became more and more courageous as the battle went on, just like the great general of those days. However, the other party definitely could not be the Dragon Rider General. You know, the second prince once said that General Longqi had already been murdered by the old emperor. Besides, if he was really the Dragon Rider General, why didn't he use the spear that made everyone tremble with fear? Long Jinyan's attack speed became faster and faster, even if there were some small fry blocking his way. But under his lightning-fast attack, everyone was just treated as meatbags and was easily killed by him. Seeing that the situation was not good, Zukongnan tried to find an opportunity to escape. And just at this moment, a little boy appeared in front of everyone. The little boy came running over crying and knelt in front of Niu Erhu, who was already dead and his body was torn apart. Ooh, ar. The little mute couldn't speak and could only sob. Long Jinyang was interrupted by the sudden appearance of this person. He tilted his head and looked at the boy. He wanted to reach out and pull the little mute away, so he shouted, "Little friend, come here quickly, don't stay here." Just as he was about to step forward, a flying knife flew towards him. In order to dodge, he had to fly backwards. Zukongnan seized the opportunity, quickly came up to the little mute, and grabbed his neck with one big hand. "Don't come over here. Otherwise I'll strangle him to death." His idea was simple: as long as he had a hostage, the other party would not dare to do anything to him. Really? Seeing that the other party was holding the child hostage, Long Jinyang had no choice but to obey him and stand still. Don't mess around. If you can't win, just surrender. I, Long Jinyang, will not kill nameless people. What's more, as long as you surrender, I. He wanted to say that this general would not kill prisoners, but the words were finally held back when they came to his lips. I will never break my promise and let you guys live. How ridiculous. Do you really think that on a battlefield, as long as the enemy surrenders, the prisoners will be treated well? Zukongnan replied coldly. As soon as he said this, a terrible thought suddenly flashed through his mind, that is, the great General Long Xiaoxiao. Could it be that the Long Jinyang in front of him was the general who guarded the border back then? Thinking of this, he decided to delay time and get the other party to talk. If he really is the general, not only will he not be punished by his master, but he may also be able to escape from this hellhole. I can surrender, but you have to answer a question seriously. Long Jinyang knew very well that this was the only way, so he nodded in agreement after the other party let the child go. Zukongnan held the boy tightly in his hand and continued speaking. Do you know the Dragon Rider General? Long Jinyang's brain raced and he shook his head without hesitation to indicate that he didn't know him. Snort. Zukongnan already had the answer in his mind: the other party was Long Xiaoxiao. That's really interesting, today is indeed a good day. I actually met two important officials of the Dayu dynasty at the same time. One is He Jinyan, the first judge of the Dayu dynasty, who is known to be impartial and just and can solve cases like a god. Chapter 24. The code is okay. The other was a general from the northern border who even the emperor was afraid of and sent people to hunt him down. He was known as the killer dragon cavalryman by the Huns. If I could bring these two people to the second prince, it would be a great achievement. Zukongnan began to think about how to defeat the opponent and capture him and bring him back to Kyoto. Well, tie your hands with a rope. Long Jinyang frowned slightly. No one had ever dared to order him like this. It was simply ridiculous. He sneered and did not move at all. Seeing this, Zukongnan began to exert force with his hands. If you don't do what I say, I'll strangle him to death. Stop. A female voice suddenly sounded in the yard. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice. Fang Xiaoxiao was followed by a group of women. They were pale and had empty expressions, like the walking dead. When Long Jinyang saw the person, he took 2 steps at a time and came up to him. There was a hint of joy and worry in his eyes. Madam Fang, are you okay? Fang Xiaoxiao nodded slightly and then said. That little mute must not be in any danger. I still owe him my life. After these words were spoken, Long Jinyuan who was standing beside him was confused. Fortunately, Murong Changqing had already learned from him that it was the little mute who informed He Jinyan. Then he quickly told the whole story. Long Jinyang is a very moral person. Since it was the little mute who saved Madame Fang, he would definitely not stand by and watch her die. He turned and looked towards the void south road. As long as you release the child, I will tie his hands and feet as you wish. Zukongnan nodded grimly. Without saying a word, Long Jinyang began to look for a rope on the ground, and then asked Murong Changqing to tie his wrists. Fang Xiaoxiao watched this scene happen. She knew that the only thing she could do now was to follow the other party's request, and then she lowered her head to ask Murong Changqing beside her. Are you sure? Don't worry, my lady. I don't care about a demon. Murong Changqing made an okay gesture to him. He had just learned this from Madame Fang. Long Jinyang, who was standing by, watched his actions with a puzzled look in his eyes, so he lowered his head and asked in a low voice. Brother Murong, what are you doing? Murong Changqing chuckled and blurted out 2 words, secret. Speechless. Long Jinyang could only give up, thinking that maybe it was some secret code or something. He put his hands behind his back and let him put the rope around his wrists. Murong Changqing was not polite either. Not only did he tie her up tightly, he also tied a knot deliberately, fearing that she would be able to break free easily. Then he shook his sleeve, revealing a unique short black blade. This short blade is about a size smaller than an ordinary dagger. From the appearance, it looks more like a female hairpin. Put it away. I will show you the hand gesture I just made in a moment. Once you see it, use this blade to shoot it into Shukongnan's eyes. His voice was very small, like that of a fly or mosquito. Long Jinyang did not react at all. Zukongnan saw that his hands were finally tied up, and a smug look appeared on his face. He was indeed worried about his unfathomable strength just now. If he continued to fight with the opponent for a few more rounds, he would probably run out of energy and be defeated. Although no one could kill him easily, he could not prevent himself from being detained by the other party due to his weak body. Hand him over quickly, don't waste any more time. Otherwise I will kill this little mute. Zukongnan said this while exerting all his strength in his hands. The little mute whimpered in pain. Long Jinyang walked quickly towards the other party. Don't do anything, I'll be right over. At the same time, Zukongnan saw that it was about to reach him. He sneered, but the strength in his hands did not weaken, but increased instead. The little mute felt suffocated. Tears flowed from his eyes and he struggled desperately, trying to break free from the other's big hand that was binding his neck. But it was all in vain. Zukongnan exerted force again. Fang Xiaoxiao shouted upon seeing this. Don't want. But it's too late. She should have anticipated this outcome. But her conscience urged her not to be impulsive, as saving lives was the most important thing. Sure enough. Murong Changqing's mouth twitched a few times. He guessed that the other party would use despicable means. Long Jinyang, look here. Long Jinyang glanced at him and made a secret signal gesture. He shook his wrist, quickly cut the rope, and then moved 2 meters away from Zukongnan, and instantly shot out the black gold short blade in his hand. Whoosh! The short blade was like a flash of lightning, flying straight towards Zukongnan's right eye. All that was heard was a whimper. Zukongnan covered his right eye with both hands and kept wailing in pain. Hidden weapon. How dare you use such despicable means on me? Long Jinyang snorted coldly and flew up to drop the little mute on the ground. It's a pity that although he is fast, he is still not as fast as Zukongnan. When the little mute was about to reach the bottom, a blood-red claw appeared on his chest. There was a throbbing heart in the blood-red claws. No! Fang Xiaoxiao was so shocked that he screamed loudly, then his whole body went limp and he collapsed to the ground. Two figures appeared behind her at the same time. Murong Chanqing and Pei Yang just came behind her. Pei Yang's face was full of worry at this moment. He happened to jump down from the courtyard wall and heard him screaming in pain. Fang Xiaoxiao looked up at the two people behind her, and at this moment she felt a layer of darkness covering her eyes. When she woke up again, a familiar person was sitting next to her. What am I doing? Don't talk, take the medicine first. Murong Chanqing held the medicine bottle in his hand and blew the medicine carefully with the spoon. Bitter. Fang Xiao frowned, looking disgusted. Good medicine tastes bitter, take another sip. Murong Chanqing continued. At this moment, the door was pushed open. The person who came in was Pei Yang. The other party first glanced at everything in the room, then turned his gaze to the two people on the bed. He pretended to cough and signaled Murong Chanqing to leave. But just pretend you didn't hear or see it. He was still blowing the medicine in his hand. This left Pei Yang speechless for a while, so he had to speak. Since my wife has woken up, please go check on brother Jinyan. How is he, Jinyan? You won't die in a short time. If it's later, I can't guarantee it. Okay. Fang Xiaoxiao lifted the quilt, quickly turned over and got out of bed, avoiding Murong Chanqing's feeding. Without even turning her head, she ran towards where Jinyan was. The main reason is that I really don't want to drink those Chinese medicines. They are bitter and smell bad, and are not as convenient as pills. The two of them came to Jinyan's room one after the other. As soon as Fang Xiaoxiao walked to the bedside, she saw that his eyes were gradually becoming cloudy and his breathing was becoming disordered. She reached out and felt the other person's neck for pulse. Fortunately, as long as he receives acupuncture and takes the white poison pills he made himself, and rests for a while, he should be fine. I really didn't expect that Jinyan had such a strong vitality. If he were an ordinary person, he would have died 100 or 80 times already. Chapter 25 Losing Face for the Official Family. After getting everything done, she was already sweating profusely and lying weakly in front of the 8 Immortals table. Pei Yan wanted to go forward and say something comforting. But he still didn't do it, just stood aside and looked at the other person. At this time, he was still in a complicated mood, worried that after the other party knew his identity, he would inform on him in exchange for a large amount of money. I can't easily trust anyone in front of me, even Jinyan. Fang Xiaoxiao felt a little thirsty at this time. She wanted to stand up and pour herself a glass of water, but she felt weak all over. When he turned his head to look at Pei Yang, the other party was also looking at him. The two looked at each other. Pei Yang remained indifferent. Water. Fang Xiao murmured a few words, but did not get any response from him. Damn, raising a pig is more useful than this guy. He has no sense at all. She secretly complained in her heart. Fortunately, Long Jinyan's worried voice came from behind. Hey, Madam Fang, don't go to sleep yet. This is the chicken soup I made for you. Chicken soup. Fang Xiaoxiao immediately perked up a little upon hearing that, and glanced sideways at the person walking towards her. It's really timely relief. Long Jinyang walked quickly to him and carefully fed him chicken soup. This scene made Pei Yang, who was standing beside him, feel unhappy, but he did not say a word. He just turned around and slammed the door and left. This left Fang Xiaoxiao and Long Jinyang completely confused. Long Jinyang continued to feed him chicken soup. He was so careful, afraid of burning the other person. Fang Xiao smiled and said, "Let me do it myself. You should also go back and rest early. There are still many things to do tomorrow." Long Jinyang nodded and answered yes. The two chatted for a long time. They stopped only when Jinyan, who was lying on the bed, started coughing. Fang Xiaoxiao handed the empty bowl to Long Jinyang and walked quickly to the bed. She bent over and looked at it. At this time, He Jianyan's face was still pale and his eyes were dull. Because he had been poisoned by Zukongnan before, his lips now looked dark purple. If Fang Xiaoxiao hadn't detoxified him, he would have died long ago. He Jianyan raised his eyes slowly, muttering the word, water, to himself. You can't drink water now. You have to wait 72 hours before you can drink water. Have a good rest. I'm going out first. After Fang Xiaoxiao gave him a few instructions, she stood up and walked out of the door. The full moon is exceptionally bright today, illuminating the courtyard very brightly. In the courtyard, the other three sat at a small stone table sipping bitter tea. Pei Yang remained silent, his face cold. When he saw the person coming, a subtle expression flashed in his eyes. Instead, Long Jinyang stood up, took the osmanthus cake from the table and said with a smile. Madam Fang, I see you didn't eat just now. I guess you're hungry now. Eat some osmanthus cake first. I'll make noodles for you. Good. Fang Xiaoxiao came up to the group of people and picked up a piece at random and put it in her mouth. This made Murong Changqing drool. He thought to himself that if he could expose his kung fu, he would have snatched the osmanthus cake from Long Jinyang. After Long Jinyang handed the porcelain plate of osmanthus cake to Fang Xiaoxiao, he quickly walked towards the kitchen. After Fang Xiaoxiao sat down, she glanced at the two people in front of her. Eat it, why don't you eat it, don't you like it? Dislike. What a joke. Murong Changqing was dissatisfied, but he didn't dare to say it in front of the two of them. He just lay on the stone table, looking listless. When Fang Xiaoxiao saw this situation, she had no choice but to ask about it. Are you sick? Yes. Let me help you take a look. Don't worry, my lady. I'm just gluttonous. The sweet-scented osmanthus cake in your hand can cure me. Murong Changqing did not hide it at all and pointed his finger at the pastries in the bowl not far in front of him. Fang Xiaoxiao had no choice but to push it in front of the other person and said, eat it. The other party was not polite either and stuffed one into his mouth with each hand. At this time, Pei Yang looked at the person next to him with contempt. Based on what he knew about Murong Changqing, this guy was definitely not an ordinary person and must be the son of a wealthy businessman. Otherwise, looking at the weapons used by the opponent before, they were made of black gold and not something that ordinary people could afford. And the opponent's extremely terrifying and strange method seemed to be inherited from the Ji family. After he threw out the black gold short blade, he rushed to the ground quickly. Pei Yang knew that this short blade must have some hidden secrets. Ordinary people simply cannot reach it. It is said that it would cost 10 taels of gold just to make a black gold short blade. If calculated in silver, it would be several thousand taels. I think Murong Changqing's identity is probably related to certain people in the court. Because the black gold material was accessible only to officials of the third rank and above in the Dayu dynasty. The imperial court had extremely strict control over this type of rare metal material and strictly prohibited private ownership by private individuals. If you are discovered, you will lose your head. Pei Yang originally wanted to find an opportunity to have a good chat with him in private, to find out who he was and why he came here. Murong Changqing's mouth was full of pastry crumbs. But he didn't care at all. Instead, he kept stuffing osmanthus cake into his mouth, as if he hadn't eaten anything for years. His small eyes were fixed on the pastries on the plate in front of him, afraid that someone would snatch them from him. I am speechless. It's just a piece of osmanthus cake, why make such a big deal out of it? I do understand. Murong Changqing usually pretends to be cold and deep just to hide his nature of being a foodie. This is really a good thing. Fang Xiaoxiao had just finished the pastry in her hand and was about to get another piece from the plate, but when she looked down, there was nothing left. Even the plate was not licked by it. That pastry looks like a delicious dish. It made her even start to doubt whether there was something wrong with her tongue. Why can't I taste the flavor? Instead, it feels dry and hard to swallow. Leisurely. Long Jinyang was holding a bowl of noodles in his hand, with a smile still on his face. But when he just walked up to the three people, he was almost stunned by the scene before him. What's going on? The osmanthus cake is gone so quickly. At this time, Murong Changqing patted his round belly and wanted to take a rest. But the next second, a faint fragrance and a hint of wheat came from the nostrils. It smells so good. This is even more delicious than the noodles I made after spending so much time researching. It must be better than the noodles made by professional chefs. While flattering him, he reached out to snatch his noodles. Pity. His wishful thinking ultimately failed. Long Jinyang dodged the opponent's outstretched hand and used his left hand to slap the slender white hand in front of him hard. You still want to steal some? There's plenty in the kitchen. Just go get yourself a bowl. Okay, I didn't expect Brother Long to be so considerate. He is truly a good brother to me. Murong Chanqing exaggerated the other person with his mouth, but his body had already rushed to the kitchen. He couldn't wait any longer and wanted to pour everything in the pot into his stomach. Pei Yang sat aside, still looking indifferent. In his opinion, this was too embarrassing. Even if Murong Chanqing was really a member of the official family, he had really lost his official status. Chapter 26 Farewell to He Jinyan. The next morning, sunlight slowly poured into the room through the lattice windows, making the whole house much brighter. Fang Xiaoxiao sat upright beside the bed, holding a white pill in her hand. The man lying on the bed had a very handsome face, sharp eyebrows and eyes, and a thin face, but it couldn't hide his handsome appearance. Thank you for your careful care over the past few days. I can take the medicine myself. You don't need to trouble me anymore. Okay, just lie down obediently. Fang Xiaoxiao glanced at her little mouth and handed the white pill in her hand to her mouth. He Jinyan is still wrapped in bandages and clamped with wooden boards, making it very inconvenient for him to move. Fortunately, it can be removed in 2 days. He has been lying in bed for several days ever since he was seriously injured in the last battle with Zukongnan. He Jinyan looked at the person in front of him with gratitude. If it weren't for his rescue, I would have died long ago. Not to mention being able to complete the mission and capture Zukongnan. What he has to do now is to wait until he feels better and return to Beijing to report. After Fang Xiaoxiao fed the medicine to the other party, she asked, "Are you hiding something from me? Don't treat us all like fools. If it weren't for what you have in your hand, I would have wanted to ask you a long time ago." He Jinyan sighed. What was to come would come, and there was no need to hide his identity from her. After all, the other party was his savior. If not, he would have been beheaded long ago. Since my lady has asked, I will not hide anything from you anymore. In fact, I am from the capital, serving as a 4th-rank official in the imperial court and the governor of the criminal department. This time I came to Yangzhou to investigate a missing person case. Fang Xiao said, "Oh," and waited for the other party to speak next. He Jinyan then continued. At first, I wanted to conceal my identity and investigate the incident secretly, but by mistake, I was caught by the county government and forced to mine ore. My wife should also know what happened next. After listening to what He Jinyan said, Fang Xiaoxiao finally understood that the other party had been contacting her with a purpose from the very beginning. Fortunately, we were able to catch the bad guys, which is a great achievement. Time flies. After He Jinyan had recuperated, he walked out of the room. Everyone sat at the stone table, sipping bitter tea. Fang Xiaoxiao has also started planning to build a house these days. The tiled house at home is not big now, and there are still 3 left that I Haven Tea brought back. She has to find a way to make more money. As for He Jinyan's matter, let him do whatever he wants. He Jinyan looked at the people sitting around the stone table, his face still cold. Pei Yang glanced at the back and continued drinking tea. As for Long Jinyang, he became silent in order to prevent He Jinyan from discovering his identity. Only Murong Chanqing said with a smile, "Oh, our great hero has finally regained his former glory. Come and try Madame Fang's homemade new tea. It's so fragrant." He Jinyan bowed and indicated that it was not necessary. He walked towards Fang Xiaoxiao. "My dear, thank you for your careful care these past few days. Now that the matter has been settled, we need to rush to the capital day and night, so it is inconvenient for us to stay here for long." Fang Xiaoxiao took a look and said, "Oh." She just felt sorry for her husband who she had spent 5 taels of silver to buy, but who had never done a single day of work for her. Just with that one sentence, she left. It makes me feel very unbalanced, but what can I do? Is it possible to hold the other person and not let him or leave? He is a public servant and I am just a commoner, what can I do? Seeing that they didn't care at all, He Jinyan didn't think too much about it and just said goodbye to them. Fang Xiaoxiao watched him walk farther and farther away until he disappeared from her sight. After seeing He Jinyan off, the next thing to happen was the 3 people left in the Yarman. She no longer begged those people to help her with housework. I just hope you don't end up like He Jinyan, a figure in the court who gets into trouble. Peace and safety is a blessing. This is what she wants most now. The last time I was on the verge of life and death, the shadow remains to this day. These days she made pills day and night just to be able to build a house. But I found that, judging from the current progress, selling medicine is not a long-term solution because the money comes in too slowly. No, it's not possible. Building a house costs a lot of money, at least 70 or 80 taels of silver. After working all day, it's still not enough for 5 taels of silver. How long will it take to accomplish this? We need to change our thinking. Fang Xiaoxiao thought to herself, several ideas flashing through her mind quickly. At present, although I am a time traveler, the only things I can do are making medicine, treating illnesses and cooking. Hey! I can make medicinal food. Anyway, no one has thought of this method in this era. Thinking of this, she quickly walked towards the town. During this period, he entrusted the household affairs to Long Jinyang. Jinyang, remember to chop the firewood. Okay, lady, don't worry. Long Jinyang patted his chest. Fang Xiao nodded with satisfaction and turned around to look at the empty stone table. Logically speaking, Pei Yang and Murong Changqing should be drinking tea at this time. I don't know what happened since He Jinyan left. These two guys rarely stay at home all day. Especially Murong Changqing, who always waited in front of the stove on time for dinner. He always came back late at night and ran to the stove to cook some noodles. I really don't know what the two of them are doing. Fang Xiaoxiao thought about it and was too lazy to care about the two of them anymore. She was going to go to the town to cooperate with the old gentleman and open a herbal medicine restaurant. The streets were still bustling with people and the sounds of hawking were heard one after another. The brothel was as busy as usual, with people coming in and out. Fang Xiaoxiao carried a bamboo basket on her back, lowered her head, and walked leisurely along the green bricks under her feet. After taking only 2 steps, he bumped into a big man. The big man was more than 2 meters tall, with a broad back and a horrifying scar on his face. The first impression he gives is that he is tough, like a bandit leader. Fortunately, this is a county town with a government office, otherwise it would be really scary. Fang Xiaoxiao rubbed her aching head, looked up, and saw his fierce face, so she quickly apologized. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. The big man patted his chest with a look of disgust on his face. Don't you look at the road when you walk? If you weren't a woman, I would really like to smash your head with one punch. Forehead. Fang Xiaoxiao was speechless for a while. What kind of person is this? He is just like a bandit. She was too lazy to deal with it anymore, so she just lowered her head and thought about moving on. Who knew that the big man would grab her bamboo basket? Wait a minute, help me check if you have seen this person before. Fang Xiao frowned and turned around to look at the portrait in the other person's hand. I saw a very abstract portrait drawn with a brush on the crumpled paper. The portrait painting can be said to be comparable to that of a 3-year-old child. To be honest, if there wasn't a nose and eyes on the portrait, she wouldn't be sure it was a person. Fortunately, there was a line of small words written on the painting: Dragon Rider, reward of 500 taels of silver and gold. 500 taels of gold. Fang Xiao's eyes almost popped out. According to the currency calculation method of this dynasty, 1 tael of gold was equal to 100 taels of silver, and 1 tael of silver could support the monthly expenses of a family of 5. You should know that many families actually only spend 5 to 6 taels of silver a year. Chapter 27 discussing medicinal diet. Then 500 taels of gold would be 50,000 taels of silver, which is considered very wealthy. It is enough to buy several properties or even 2 brothels. Well, not bad. But who is this Long Xiao? Why does his name look familiar? Forget it. He looks like an unforgivable bandit. How could I possibly see him? No. The big man touched his bald head and thought that it seemed to be true. He just asked around, but to no avail. Okay, then if you see this person, remember to find me at the corner of East Alley. Good. You are sick. How could I possibly look for you? It says here that there are 500 taels of gold, and there is a reward for the informant. Fang Xiaoxiao agreed with a smile on her face, but she was actually muttering something in her heart. She is not a fool. If she really meets someone, she will let Long Jinyang take the lead. She had seen his kung fu last time. He was very good at wielding a stick, comparable to the martial arts masters in martial arts movies. But, even masters have to eat, chop wood and do housework. As she was thinking about it, she brushed past the big man and thought she should quickly go find the old gentleman. No one knew who the old man was. After working together for so long, he even forgot to ask his name. After we meet, we still have to ask, otherwise it would be too rude to call him old man every time. When we arrived at the agreed location, the old man was squatting in front of the rouge and powder shop as usual. Fang Xiao walked towards the other party quickly. "Here are the pills, old man." The old man took the medicine bottle with a smile, put it directly into his arms, and then took out 15 taels of silver from his purse. After Fang Xiaoxiao took the money, she hesitated for a long time before speaking. "Old man, I don't know your name." Zhu Wen covered his face and smiled. "You can call me Mr. Zhu." Fang Xiao's brows relaxed and she stopped asking the other person's name, but instead said, "Mr. Zhu, I have a way to make money. Are you interested?" When Zhu Wen heard this, his eyes rolled around. He was also worried about how to make money. Although the pills he had were selling well, the money came in quite slowly. From the money he made to their buyer, he could only earn 20 taels of silver. In addition, it took too long for the woman to produce the medicine, so it was not very cost-effective. He had been thinking of opening a pharmacy with the other party to earn more money. But when it comes to the pill issue, there is already Yarojitang, so he definitely cannot compete with them. You can listen to it first and then make a decision. Hey, there's a chance, as long as you don't refuse. Fang Xiao knows it carefully. "Mr. Zhu, have you ever heard of medicinal diet?" Zhu Wen touched his goat's beard and thought. He had heard of medicinal diet before, but that was only mentioned by someone in the imperial hospital. But in reality, no one has actually done it. The reason is that after the medicinal food is prepared, it is completely impossible to swallow. Not only is it bitter and smells bad, but it also makes people want to vomit when swallowing it. I haven't heard of it. Please tell me more about it. When Fang Xiaoxiao heard this, she naturally told him everything she knew. She chattered on and on about her plan. Zhu Wen was initially curious, then shocked, and finally clapping his hands. "Good, very good. I have never heard that medicinal food can be prepared in this way. Soon, come to my shop and we'll study and make it together." Shop? These words suddenly popped up in Fang Xiao's mind. It turned out that the other party owned a store. But why can't I go to the other party's store to trade? Why do I have to come here every time? Zhu Wen seemed to have guessed what was in his mind. He pretended to cough twice and then spoke. "Regarding the store, I have only made the decision today and have not yet started the purchase. We will meet again in 3 days. I will go find someone to set up a shop, and we will go together when the time comes." Oh! Fang Xiaoxiao finally understood that the old man in front of her did not have a shop, but he was really amazing. He opened a shop as soon as he said it. His strength should not be underestimated. After bidding farewell to the other party, she walked towards the pastry shop carrying the bamboo basket on her back. "Now, after counting all the miscellaneous money on me, I have more than 30 taels of silver. I might as well buy some delicious food and reward Long Jinyang. As for Murong Changqing and Pei Yang, let them take advantage of Long Jinyan's influence. Anyway, no matter what, we are all family and we can't have different opinions." She was wearing coarse linen clothes. Although she had a very pretty face, her attire made one realize at first glance that she was of low status. You can tell at first glance that she comes from a poor family and doesn't look like a young lady at all. In fact, it's not that she doesn't want to dress up or buy nice clothes. But buying clothes is too expensive. Even if you go and buy a batch of cloth, the price would be around 20 or 30 taels, and that wasn't even particularly good quality. If you want good quality silk, you have to spend at least 100 or 80 taels of silver. To me now, it seems like an astronomical figure. Alas, no matter what era, money is always a good thing. Fang Xiaoxiao sighed helplessly, wondering why she had traveled through time and space and become a prodigal son from a poor and destitute family. Logically speaking, those who travel through time should come from aristocratic families or be the children of high-ranking officials. Unfortunately, it's all just thought. Fortunately, I refuse to accept my fate, thinking that one day, I would be able to wear silk and satin and wear a golden hairpin on my head. As soon as she stepped into the pastry shop, she heard a discordant and extremely unpleasant sound. Oh, why do I smell such a poor smell? It turns out that the poor and cheap Miss Fang is here. Yu Donglei pretended to be in great pain, frowned, covered her mouth and nose with the silk in her hand, and glanced at the person at the door. She originally came here to buy some cakes today, thinking of inviting Master Pei Yang to her home for a visit. Little did she know that as soon as she entered the door, the person she hated extremely appeared behind her. At the same time, the woman who was buying pastries in the store also looked back towards the store entrance. Isn't she the useless wife of Chilan? Yes, I know this person. She used to be the eldest daughter of the Fang family, but unfortunately she was a prodigal son who almost squandered all the family property. And she chose 7 weak and feeble-faced scholars as her husbands. I was wondering why she looked so familiar. It turned out to be this girl. I guess those 7 gentlemen can't serve her. These people spoke with sarcasm, as if Fang Xiaoxiao did not exist. Their voices were quite loud, attracting many passers-by outside the door to watch. Fang Xiao glanced around. A gossip can say whatever she wants, as long as she isn't embarrassed, then it's others who are embarrassed. She thought to herself, keeping a smile on her face. Walk quickly to the Osmondus cake. Please pack me a pound of Osmondus cake, half a pound of Dingshan cake, and half a pound of plum blossom cake, thank you, she said, pointing to some pretty good pastries in front of her. The shop owner smiled and wanted to ask the waiter to help pack the food. Yu Donglei was displeased when she saw that what he ordered were what she wanted. She said, "Who are you to be? How dare you want to be the same as me? Boss, aren't you afraid that after you pack your bags, people won't pay you, but will give you a few broken pills to pay for it?"